Hey everyone, thanks so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
When Monkey D. Luffy was 7, he boldly declared that Princess Usagi would one day be his queen. Years later, that childish promise becomes reality. As Usagi turns 21, a now 22-year-old Luffy arrives with his bewildered crew for a royal wedding that will shake both seas and stars. With sailors Tenshi, pirates, and the unexpected presence of Ace and Sabo, chaos, laughter, and heartfelt moments unfold before and during the ceremony, proving that some promises, no matter how impossible, are never meant to be broken. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is The Princess and the Pirate by Saranghae Tenshi. Respect to author.
Chapter 21. More revelations and a slight meddling. What do you mean by Akainu being the new fleet admiral? Questioned Ace, who spat out the name of the man who killed him while he protected Luffy. Everyone was still reeling over the revelations that the entire Silver Moon Kingdom Island was just a reincarnation of the once well-known Silver Alliance from millennia ago. They couldn't wrap around their heads that a very powerful artifact, the Ginzuisho, had made it so that the people from the past were all reincarnated to the present day. Even though Ace knew the powers of the Ginzuisho, he was also shocked by it. He knew that without those powers, he wouldn't have had his magical powers of fire and becoming the personal protector of his Saranghae. Yet, reincarnating the solar system's entire population, that probably took a lot of magic. He also developed a worrying face when he realized that that was the power his own Saranghae was learning to harness during her educational days. Though, Garp telling them about the newest fleet admiral made Ace's rage boil. How can he become the fleet admiral to begin with? Questioned Shanks in anger. Well, I could have, said Garp, yet, the higher-ups decided that if I could harbor past enemies' children, what else was I have been hiding? It's just been a good thing that I already filed vacation time for this wedding that I could be here. What do you mean by that? Questioned Ben. The higher-ups are suspicious of me, you see, said Garp, especially hiding not one, but two, worst criminals' sons. They would have relieved me before hunting me down and killing me. Which won't be happening, said Queen Serenity IV, I have already filed long ago that you are part of my family. If they are hunting you down, they are going against a royal kingdom that has powerful allies, especially if we disappear. They won't find you if our island disappears. That's another thing that's curious, but not pressing to question at a moment, said King Neptune. Curious, questioned Pluto before they could get back to the problem at hand. About what? Where does this island disappear to? Questioned King Neptune. We know of the Sky Islands, yet when we try to find yours, it's not even with the Sky Islands. Ah, said an amused Pluto before turning to Queen Serenity IV, shall I answer? Of course, my friend, said Queen Serenity, yet, afterwards, please return to your post. I know that you have to guard it. Everyone looked curious after King Neptune questioned where the island would disappear to. Of course, they knew the dangers that are awaiting them, but they couldn't help their curiosity when everyone knew that the island could just simply disappear. Queen Serenity IV, despite the situation, was glad that everyone was curious. Well, everyone was curious besides her daughter, Hotaru, and Ace. Sabo would have known, yet due to circumstances out of their reach, Sabo didn't remember until Ace's so-called death and being reunited with Luffy when Luffy was 19. Sailor Pluto, on her part, just smiled mysteriously before revealing, the island is tied to the Ginzuisho, said Pluto, we use its magical powers slightly so that we can transverse the solar system, setting up the other castles on the planets for emergency uses. Nani, exclaimed Nami in surprise, you mean, this island can travel into space? Of course, said Pluto, though, that's only if the queen or the princess doesn't use the Ginzuisho in battle or training. Super, exclaimed Frankie. I am surprised by this revelation, said King Cobra. Can we travel into space as well? Questioned a curious Robin, so much we do not know about our universe, and this island can take us there. Though how can we breathe in space? Questioned Chopper. I think I am coming down with space travel adventure disease, said a shivering Usopp who was cowering behind his father. As everyone started to talk among themselves about the second secret of the Silver Moon Kingdom Island, the ASL siblings, Serenity, and Hotaru saw Sailor Pluto whispering something to the Queen. They didn't know what Sailor Pluto was muttering to the Queen about, but they were curious. They didn't have to wait long to know that the brief whisperings were about Sailor Pluto's post before disappearing in a dark portal. They looked around to see if anyone else caught what Sailor Pluto did, but sweat dropped instead when they saw that everyone was still talking about space travel. It was only when Queen Serenity IV clapped her hands together to bring them back into attention. "Now, that you know our second most kept secret," said Queen Serenity, "let us get back to the despairing topic at hand." "Yeah," said Sabo, like what Akainu is going to do once he sees Luffy and an alive Ace in this meeting. "Well," said Queen Serenity, "it's a good thing Ace is coming with a different look." "Different look?" questioned Haruta, "what do you mean?" "Yeah," said Namur, "shouldn't Ace not be in Akainu's presence?" "Of course, I'm going to be," exclaimed Ace, who held out on cursing in front of Serenity. "I have to protect my Imoto from that so-called reincarnated fiancé and that so-called fleet admiral." "We aren't telling you to not protect her," said Thatch, "we are just worried that something will happen, especially to you." "You could always trust the captain," pointed Kakai. "Demo," said Izo, "look what happened the first time." Ace froze at Izo's reminder as everyone else who didn't participate in the discussion paled slightly. They remembered what happened the first time, and how Izo worded it. It seemed as though the Whitebeard pirates didn't have trust in Ace to not be captured again for a repeated execution performance. Sabo, Luffy, Serenity, and Hotaru grew closer to Ace while the Spade pirates surrounded them. The Strafut pirates didn't know what happened, but they also tensed when they saw Luffy tense up. Zoro also had his hands on his swords in a ready position to defend Luffy's family, even though the Whitebeard pirates are supposed to be their allies. He could tell that Izo didn't mean what he stated, yet the context could have been a misunderstanding as well. Zoro wasn't wrong as Thatch hit Izo's head in warning. "Itai," said Izo, "why did you hit my head for?" "Think on the statement you just said, Yoi," said Marco. "What's wrong with what I said?" questioned Izo. "I was just reminding you all about what happened when Ace went to confront Teach alone. And it also shows that you lost trust in Captain," pointed out Finnemore. "We just said to trust in the Captain, and you go and said that statement, Commander Izo." Izo paled as he recounted what he just said. It didn't mean he didn't trust Ace, but he just wanted to let everyone remember that Ace died that fateful day. Whitebeard and the other commanders trusted Ace to go after Teach alone, which was a bad decision on their part. Nothing was on Ace on that day, yet, thinking back, Izo could tell the others around him thought otherwise. The others, on their part, took Izo's statement as if he just said they couldn't trust Ace to be Serenity's protector while he was near Akainu. I didn't mean we don't trust you, Ace," said Izo with a stutter. "Demo, I am just worried. We trust that you could take Teach by yourself, and that was our bad decision since what happened afterwards." "I see," said Queen Serenity. "Demo, that is not your decision to make. Ace is one of my own, and I have full trust that Ace will control himself." "Of course, I can control myself," scoffed Ace before thinking. "I mean, I learned how to with a lot of training." "Don't you mean the Senshi grabbing a hold of you and making you learn to flee from danger while curbing your anger?" teased Hotaru. "The Senshi did what?" laughed out Sabo. "They learned that Ace turned back towards this Akainu person in anger instead of running to safety with Luffy," explained Hotaru with mirth in her tone, "and, after he came back shopping with Serenity, they all manhandled Ace into the training field to learn the error of his ways." "Maybe we should have done that with him," muttered Deuce. "Agreed," muttered back Saber. As Ace flushed in embarrassment while Sabo and Luffy openly laughed at him, the Whitebeard pirates were berating themselves, especially Izo. They knew that Ace was a much brother to them as with Sabo, Luffy, Hotaru, and the princess, yet what Izo said might have pushed their non-existing progress with Ace. As Izo said, they trusted Ace, they didn't trust their judgment in letting Ace be alone again to face an adversary, especially if it is the person who murdered him in front of everyone in that particular war. Queen Serenity IV clapped her hands once more to get everyone's attention due to them straying from the topic. "As I said Queen Serenity IV, Ace will be coming along as a protector to my daughter. Luffy will have to stay here though." "Ah," whined Luffy, "why do I have to?" "I know that you want to fight Prince Endymion V," said Queen Serenity. "Demo, we have to access the situation first." "I should come along to protect Sarah Imoto," said Sabo. "I can pretend to be another guard as well." "EA," said Hotaru, "as Serenity's other protector, it is my right to accompany them." "I still want to come," pouted Luffy. "Maybe Luffy should come too," said Nami, telling him no will just make him want to go even more. "Remember all the other stunts he pulled while we were on your kingdoms." "Don't remind me," groaned Vivi, "I remember he led the Marines to us while we were in disguise." "Yeah," said Usopp, "maybe Luffy should go too. Just no telling what a bored Luffy would do to your island, your majesty." The Strafuts remembered all of the wacky things Luffy did while they even tried to tell him to be discreet. Luffy could never stay still for even a minute and would cause havoc even if he was left alone. Sabo and Ace could also think about all of the times Luffy never listened and winced. The brothers hoped that Luffy would listen to Queen Serenity IV though. They all viewed her as a mother, after all. Queen Serenity IV, on her part, listened to what the Strafuts and their royal allies were talking about as she thought. She knew that Luffy would not sit still, yet she knew that they had to access how much Prince Endymion V remembers and what the situation is being called on. The fact that they also do not know who his family in this life is also poses a problem. Luffy, said Queen Serenity IV, my command still stands. You will not come along to the meeting. There are a lot of factors in this situation, and that's why I said you couldn't come until we access the decision. This command is final. Hi, said a still pouting Luffy. And me, questioned Sabo, can't I come along as well? And maybe one of us, questioned a nervous Haruta. I believe Sabo should come, said Queen Serenity as she had a thoughtful look on her face. He may be a good tactician and could spot something missing. Turns to Dragon Nay, Dragon-san. When he wants to be, said Dragon, I still remember that bloody mission that earned him that epithet. Epithet, questioned Rebecca. The bloody gentleman, said Dragon. Those that knew who that epithet was for blanched as they looked at Sabo. They knew about a person who was portrayed as the bloody gentleman, yet they didn't know that Sabo was that person. Serenity, Luffy, and Hotaru looked at Sabo in awe as Ace pouted inwardly. He wished he had a better epithet that sounded cooler than Fire Fist. Don't get him wrong. Being named with his technique was nice, but everyone that could control fire, like Sailor Mars, could probably have fire on their fists. Sabo could just feel Ace pouting inwardly as he grinned outwardly towards everyone. You're that guy, questioned a shocked Shanks. It's my epithet after all, said Sabo. I thought your epithet was the revolutionary's second in command, questioned Rikuyo. That's my position, said a deadpan Sabo before grinning. I bet you wanted a better epithet, Ace. Yeah, said a drawled out Ace, I'm good being one of the Senshi. I get my own epithet that way when I am one. Why you're a Senshi, questioned a surprised Curiel. And that's why Okasama is granting me to come with her in Imoto, said Ace as he pointed at the newest tattoo on his back. I'm not just a personal guard to Imoto. This symbol is my epithet. Those who saw the tattoo before gaped at the newest revelation on what that tattoo meant. Serenity and Hotaru looked at Ace proudly as Queen Serenity IV looked at Ace with love. She didn't even hesitate at that moment to make Ace one of her Senshi, the main personal guard to Princess Serenity V. She knew that Ace loves her daughter like a sister and was fiercely protective of her and, to an extent, Hotaru. Making Ace a Senshi was one of the best decisions she could have made. Queen Serenity IV also didn't stop Ace just as Ace's tattoo started to glow before encasing Ace in a fiery transformation. There, before everyone, was Ace with an orange mask over his eyes and an orange GI. His hair also had orange and red streaks before a hand took off the mask, leaving Ace smirking at the shocked looks. The tattoo is a nice touch, said Ace. Demo, it's not for show. It's like your transformation pen like other Senshi have, said Sabo in surprise. KK Kakoi, C-C cool, shouted Usopp, Chopper, and Luffy together. Impressive, said King Dold. I want a transformation like that, said a whiny Thatch. Saw it now, said Queen Serenity. I know that Luffy will be trying to sneak out, so I am hoping Shanks, Garp, Dragon, the Spade Pirates, and you Strafuts and allies will keep him in check. Ace, Hotaru, and Sabo will be acting as personal guards when we meet up with Prince Endymion V's reincarnation. The Senshi will be on standby, with Pluto watching from her post. Any objections? Hi, said Vista, you have given orders for others, yet we do not have anything to do. What are we to do? You Whitebeard commanders, questioned Queen Serenity IV with mirth before, you all, the Spades, and Ace have a date with Mercury to discuss some things, thereby making sure you have all time to think on whatever you discuss with Mercury with. Discuss, questioned a trepidation Blamenco. Oh no, groaned out Ace while the Spades and his brothers snickered at him. Why, your therapy together, of course, said Queen Serenity, I'm sure you all have things to discuss with each other before the meeting. As Ace groaned out with various amusement around him, the Whitebeard pirates, however. Chapter 22, Group Therapy Leads to a Trust Plan. Did we really not notice what we were doing to our fellow brothers, questioned Thatch. It was hours after one therapy session with Sailor Mercury. Ace, the Spade Pirates, and the Whitebeards were with Sailor Mercury for hours, Sailor Mercury listening while all of the Whitebeard commanders, Spade Pirates, and Ace were arguing about what they did. The Whitebeards were trying to justify their actions while the Spade Pirates and Ace argued that there would have been another way instead of giving them a mild syndrome. Flashback. Why are we having a therapy session, Yoi? Questioned Marco. After Ace reverted back to being, well, Ace, Queen Serenity IV told Ace, the Spade Pirates, and the Whitebeards to follow Sailor Aluminum Siren to where Sailor Mercury was. Ace, on his part, was still grumbling about having another therapy session right when things were getting interesting with his Imoto and his Ododo while he was surrounded by the Spade Pirates' laughter. Ace's siblings were also laughing as they followed Ace and the Spade Pirates out. The Whitebeards didn't know why they were going to do therapy instead of helping out with whatever was going on with Princess Serenity V's love life, yet they couldn't do anything as another sailor Senshi, a sailor lead crow, glared at them to get a move on. It was the glare that made the commanders follow the big group, letting the Strafuts, Shanks and his crew, the revolutionaries, besides Sabo, and Garp to plan things with Queen Serenity IV. The commanders followed them towards a room that looked like it was used for meditation purposes instead of a therapy session. The others, however, knew the room different. "Ah, you all are right on time," said a blue-haired Senshi, Mercury. "Mercury," said Ace with a nod to his head. "It is nice to see you once more, Ace-sama," said Mercury. "I believe there are more of you here this time." "Yeah," piped up Ducky Bree, "the Queen sent us here, yet we don't know why." "Well," said Mercury, "this is going to be an expanded group therapy for the Whitebeards, Ace, and the Spade Pirates. I am sure that your doctor, Deuce was it. He too diagnosed you with a similar syndrome that Ace-sama has." "Hi," said the Spade Pirates. Syndrome?" questioned Haruta. Sailor Mercury only smiled at the Whitebeard Pirates before beckoning them to follow her. Sabo gave Ace a reassuring shoulder squeeze while Luffy glomped Ace for his comfort. Both brothers then left Ace as Serenity and Hotaru hugged Ace and told him that this session will be helpful to him before they too left. Sailor Aluminum Siren bowed her head before departing with Sailor Lead Crow towards their designated assignments within the island. Once the extras left, it was just the big group of Whitebeard commanders, the Spade Pirates, and Ace. Ace, on his part, hunched his shoulders in as he sat down next to Mercury. "So," said Blenheim slowly, "why are we here?" "As the Queen said," said Mercury, "therapy. Group therapy." "And pray tell," said Fosa, "just why are we in group therapy?" "We will be talking about why a certain pirate captain was in the wrong," said Mercury. "Excuse me," questioned a bewildered Izo. "You are excused," said Mercury while she settled into the chair, a clipboard in her hand. "Now, please sit down so that we may continue." The Spade Pirates snickered at Sailor Mercury's response before surrounding Ace with their presence. Thatch slowly sat down just as the Whitebeards were trying to school their emotions at Mercury's statement. It sounded like Sailor Mercury was accusing their beloved Pops with something, and they were trying not to take offense to it while Ace was in the room. Eventually, they couldn't do anything besides sit down and listen to what this Sailor Mercury has to say. Ace, on his part, was just trying to relax on his seat as he stared at the ceiling. "Now," said Marco, "what's this about Pops being wrong, Yoi? Did you know that when separating a person forcefully from those that he or she knows and making sure that separated person is isolated from them can develop into a syndrome?" questioned Mercury. "It can," questioned a confused Jiru. "Hi," said Mercury, "this is what is known as Stockholm Syndrome." With that, Sailor Mercury started to explain, in great detail, on what this syndrome was and did to a person's psyche. The Whitebeards were listening in rapt attention, yet they couldn't understand just why this Sailor Senshi was mentioning about this syndrome. Vista actually cut Sailor Mercury's description to ask her on why they were having a group therapy about this type of syndrome. Sailor Mercury looked a bit crossed at the interruption, yet she could also see that the Whitebeards were very confused on why all of them were there. Sailor Mercury mentally pinched her nose before asking, "Do you remember how you acquired the Spade Pirates in the beginning?" "Hi," said a suspicious Marco, "Pops wanted the Spade Pirates to become a part of our family, Yoi." "Yeah," chimed in Izo, "we had them on board the ship and took us months for them to agree to be a part of our family." "And," said Mercury, "exactly what did you do with them while they were sailing with you for months?" In great detail, the Spade Pirates, Ace, and Sailor Mercury heard the Whitebeards retell the story on how Ace and his Spade Pirates became part of the Whitebeards. Sailor Mercury hummed as they all retold how Ace was a real firecracker, always saying no to being one of Whitebeard's sons. It wasn't until 3 months, they said, that Ace finally agreed to become a Whitebeard and his son. Ace winced inwardly at the reminder. Now that he knew what Sailor Mercury was talking about and hearing the accounts from the Whitebeard commanders, Ace knew that what Whitebeard did was wrong. Don't get him wrong. He still thinks of him as a decent father, but he also admits that Whitebeard should have just agreed to his no instead of keeping him isolated from his crew in hopes of gaining him as a son. The Spade Pirates also winced inwardly, yet they did so because during the retelling of the story, the Spade Pirates can see that the Whitebeards didn't know what they did wrong as well. I see, said Mercury. Now, tell me. When Ace said no the first time, what did you do? What were your reactions? Said Thatch, I felt like it was an insult to us. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a part of the Whitebeard's crew? We were all friendly and treated each other like brothers. So, I tried to befriend Ace during those 3 months. I tried to get to know him better. Same here, said Haruta. I mean, we tried so hard to get him to like us, Demo, it was impossible for some of us to get close. Why? Questioned Mercury. He was always angry, said a contemplating King Du. He would always ask us to head back to his crew. I see, said Mercury as she jotted something down. Ace and the Spade Pirates scoffed quietly to each other. They could hear that the crew wanted to get to know only Ace. It also seemed like his disagreement about becoming a part of the Whitebeards was ignored until he just had to agree to be a part of it. However, they inwardly agreed that everything was good until one crew member betrayed them all. They did have fun as a Whitebeard pirate. They just wished that their recruitment was much better than being isolated from each other until Ace agreed to become Whitebeard's son. Ace and the Spade Pirates exchanged looks with each other as they could tell that the commanders didn't understand what Whitebeard and they did wrong. So, Whitebeard pirates, said Mercury, I must reiterate a question. Do you know what Stockholm Syndrome is? Why are you repeating this syndrome thing? Questioned Rikuyo. You explained it before this so-called therapy session. So, you do not know why I have been talking about this syndrome with you all? Questioned Mercury with an eyebrow raised. Said Atmos with his arms crossed. What does this have to do with Ace? Are they for real? Questioned Mercury, who ignored Atmos' question. I guess they don't see what the connection is, questioned a befuddled Mahal. What connection? Questioned a frustrated Izo. The connection of the Stockholm Syndrome and how you Whitebeards recruited the Spade Pirates, said the frank Mercury. Nani? Yelped out Haruta. Hi, said Mercury, as I said, separation and isolation except for the interactions of basically strangers and ignoring what was clearly a firm no in joining formed the syndrome in question. What you did, even if you believe it was good intentions, was still wrong on so many levels, especially what you did to Ace when he clearly in the first couple of days refused to become Whitebeard-san's son. You practically made sure the only people he could count on during those months were you kidnappers. Sailor Mercury, at the end snapped, when she stated kidnappers to the Whitebeard pirates. She was clearly frustrated and angered that Ace had no say in what he wanted in life, no freedom to leave and sail away from the crew. Ace winced at Sailor Mercury's cutthroat words towards the Whitebeard pirates. It seemed as though she was more scolding the Whitebeards than actually having a therapy session. Ace looked at the Spade Pirates to see amusement with slight fierce anger at the commanders. He then took a chance and looked at the Whitebeard commanders to see them paling at the realization that what they did was still wrong. Now, please explain to the group just why you went through that route, said Mercury after the scolding. Ace was filled with anger and darkness, said a chastised Thatch. We thought that we could help him find some positivity in life. Did you actually ask him if he had someone in his life? Questioned Mercury. After all, he could have been faking that anger and darkness for intimidation. Started Namur. And Ace, said Mercury, please tell the group how you felt during those times you wanted to leave with your Spade Pirates. End flashback. Now, after the therapy, the Whitebeards were all together in their guest room, contemplating what they had learned in the therapy session. They couldn't even talk with Ace afterwards since he and the Spade Pirates were whisked away by another sailor Senshi. All they could do was think on what Thatch had asked. They really didn't think on how they recruited their members. They also winced outwardly when they realized that maybe some of the members were in the same boat as Ace, developed Stockholm Syndrome. Is that why Ace also says that he isn't our brother? Questioned King Du. Because we helped Pops force Ace to become one of us after his refusal for several months. I guess these therapy sessions Ace goes to helped him realize that, said a somber Haruta. Demo, said Izo, what about all the times we were together for those 2 years? Ace explained that he did feel like he had another family, said Atmos. Demo, he also explained that his feelings may not be real due to this syndrome. Groaned out King Du, this is so messed up. Then, said Marco, we fix it, yoi. Fix it, questioned everyone. Hi, said Marco, we fix it by gaining Ace's trust again, yoi. Everyone blinked as they thought about what Marco was saying. Before the therapy, they thought that they were still brothers, that they would trust each other to have each other's back. They, however, now thought differently. It is true that Ace is fine with them, as friends, yet, when it came to trusting them like brothers, like siblings, like Hotaru, Sabo, Serenity, and Luffy, Ace didn't have those feelings for them anymore. They also probably thought that the trust there probably shattered when Blackbeard, betrayed them all. Scowling at that Blackbeard thought, all eyes turned to Marco. So, how do we do that? Questioned King Du. We gain Ace's trust by protecting his Imoto, said Marco, protect her from this new fiancé in Akainu. Probably that fiancé's parents, too, pointed out Blamenco, we don't know who they are. For all we know, his parents could be celestial dragons. Or, said Curiel, heaven forbid. Akainu is his father. Ew, said Haruta and Thatch together, both making faces, that's disgusting to think about. Anyways, said Marco, let's show Ace that he can still trust us like brothers, yoi. Yeah, cheered the Whitebeard pirates. Chapter 23, The Meeting with Past Suitor Endymion. So, bored, sighed out Ace. It was the D-Day of meeting the other fiancé from long ago. With that, it was also a lot of preparation and planning on their part to make sure that nothing would happen to the royals that rule over the Silver Moon Kingdom Island. Shanks had to literally lead Luffy away from the opening that would appear once Queen Serenity IV, her daughter, Ace, Hotaru, and Sabo left the island. Dragon, on his part, directed whatever revolutionaries that were on the island to monitor the meeting point, thus leading to some of the Whitebeard commanders in their spot to protect the royals better. Garp, with a frown, was worried that he had to choose between family and duty again as he got ready to meet with the other Marines in his Marine uniform, Kobe and Helmeppo following behind. The two aforementioned Marines were also wondering if they had to choose which side to be on as well. Now, the three Marines were meeting with Akainu and the Reincarnate, three of the Whitebeard commanders were in hiding but near to protect, and the group of five were waiting impatiently for the Marines to show up. Quit your whining, Ace, said chided Sabo. Hey, said Ace, no calling me by my name. It's Pyro. Another thing, said Sabo with a pout in his tone, why do you get to be Pyro? I am just as much as made of fire like you. Because I had that devil fruit before you, said Ace mockingly, so, I get to be called Pyro while you get to be Hoka. So, not fair, said Sabo with his arms crossed. Now, children, chided Queen Serenity, please desist in arguing about your name. The Marines are on their way soon. How do you know that, Your Highness, questioned Hotaru. Do you not hear Garp's booming laughter in the horizon, questioned Queen Serenity with an eyebrow raised. Serenity snapped out of her daydreaming look as the other three paused on what Queen Serenity IV just said. There, in the distance, was the distinct booming laugh that was all Garp's. Ace and Sabo looked at each other, making sure their masks were on their faces. It was just luck that Queen Serenity IV had an extra mask, making Sabo an honorary senshi without planetary powers for this meeting. Hotaru, in her Sailor Saturn uniform, stood in front of Serenity who was peering over Hotaru's shoulder while Ace and Sabo were flanking Queen Serenity IV's sides. It didn't take long for Garp to show up with the Marines, the reincarnated guy the children only knew with Queen Serenity IV's memories, and someone with a fishbowl over his head. Sabo gaped inwardly as he saw just who else was there with everyone while the person with a bowl over his face, a celestial dragon, was trying, and failing, to get the reincarnated guy to wear a similar fishbowl around his head. Just stop it, Tosin, father, sighed the reincarnated guy, we are in front of my future mother-in-law. I also do not know why you insist on coming along. The Marines were enough to deliver me to safety. Demo, Masuko, son, whined the celestial dragon, you always try to not wear your protective wear. And, said the reincarnated guy, I told you that my earthen powers do not want to be blocked. I love the nature, Tosin, and with it, it strengthens me. The father-son duo were stopped by Garp's laughter once more. Garp couldn't believe that this reincarnated male who was obviously going to try to steal his beloved grandson's fiancée was a celestial dragon. He couldn't believe it because this celestial dragon didn't even want to wear the silly fishbowl protective gear. Queen Serenity IV also had to stifle the giggle while the children were trying to make sure Sabo was alright. Apparently, Sabo was a bit catatonic as he stared at the celestial dragons, especially the father. How dare you laugh at me, said the haughty celestial dragon. Tosin, gaped the reincarnated guy, don't be rude. Then, she shouldn't be laughing, said the celestial dragon. She, said the reincarnated guy, is much more powerful than you and I combined. Questioned the clueless celestial dragon. Ace, Sabo, Serenity, and Hotaru could only stare at the reincarnated guy as he berated his Tosin. Sabo was more surprised that he was actually berating the guy, especially when Sabo remembered that this was the world noble that gunned him down as a child. The celestial dragon, on his part, winced when he heard his Masuko explain what the woman was the ruler of the universe, a powerful person that could actually be a threat to him. However, he knew that if his Masuko married into her family, he was safe and could probably rule the entire earth in his Masuko's stead. I apologize, said the celestial dragon with a grimaced face on, I did not know who you actually were. It is quite alright, said Queen Serenity, I, too, apologize for laughing at your interesting argument. Since you know me through your Masuko, please tell me your name. Shouldn't you know my name? Questioned the celestial dragon with a glare. Tosin, said the reincarnated guy with a warning tone. Fine, grumbled the celestial dragon before standing up and puffing out his chest. I am the wonderful celestial dragon, Saint Jalmik. The same one who gunned down my 10-year-old Masuko in the East Blue, questioned Queen Serenity fiercely. The celestial dragon, Saint Jalmik, thought back to that day he was visiting the East Blue, particularly the Goa Kingdom. He vaguely remembered a very tiny boat that was crossing his vessel, a black blank flag in the wind. He also vaguely remembered a tiny blonde thing within the boat as he grew angry and shot the boat himself with his preferred weapon, a rifle-styled bazooka. Wincing at his memory, he couldn't help but look to the side as the queen in front of him was furious. He, however, could feel the tense air as the princess, too, looked at him in horror as she hugged a male that was not her fiancé. He was very much trying not to cause a scene as he could also feel the Marines looking at him, making sure that what Queen Serenity IV said was not true. You were the one who killed off one of my grandsons, questioned a furious Garp. How is he your grandson? Questioned a fierce-looking Marine, Akainu. He was sworn brothers with my grandson, said Garp, so, naturally, I adopted him. Another born criminal, muttered Akainu. What was that? Questioned Queen Serenity in a sweet tone that did not match her fierce glare. As the adults were glaring at each other, particularly Akainu and Jalmik, the reincarnated guy sighed in exasperation, muttering to himself that he would have been fine with just Sengoku coming with him instead of whatever was happening in front of him. The reincarnated guy, then, squared his shoulders as he edged away from the fierce argument between the adults before walking towards what he believed to be Senshi and his betrothed from long ago. Ace, Sabo, Hotaru, and Serenity eyed the person in suspicious as he walked and stopped right in front of Serenity before. It is nice to see you once more, my Serenity, said the reincarnated guy before he took her hand and kissed it from behind. Oh, said Serenity in surprise. Hey, said Ace with a glare behind the mask, get your hands off of the Heim. Hi, said Sabo, I have to agree with Pyro Knight about that. Besides, the Heim doesn't even remember you. For real? Questioned the reincarnated guy. Shrugged shoulders. I guess we just have to reacquaint each other before our wedding. Wedding? Yelped out Ace in anger. Now you listen here, buddy. She's not marrying you. I don't approve. Well, said the reincarnated guy, it's a good thing that I do not need your approval. Why you? Growled out Ace. Anyways, said Hotaru before Ace did something he would regret, we don't even know your name. How can the Heim remember you if you do not introduce yourself? Ah, said the reincarnated guy, forgive me for overstepping. My name is Mamoru, the reincarnated Prince of Earth. Ace muttered under his breath about how stupid his name was while Sabo was trying to keep his composure. Just like Ace, Sabo didn't like how this guy was going on about him being Serenity's husband and didn't need their approval. Did this guy believe that Serenity wouldn't have any siblings to judge his character? Did he think that he could just waltz right in after regaining his lost memories and pick up the relationship from long ago? This was a new life, a new era. If this guy thinks that he was going to steal Lu's fiancé, he had another thing coming. Before Sabo could talk, Queen Serenity IV stepped in as she, too, heard what the now-known reincarnated Earth Prince said. Endymion Oji, Prince, said Queen Serenity. Please, Serenity Jusama, said Mamoru, call me Mamoru. Right, said Queen Serenity, though as I was trying to say, you are not going to be marrying my Masumi daughter. Nani? Questioned Jalmik in anger, we came here for a wedding between my Masuko and your Masumi, just like what you agreed to in the past. And, said Queen Serenity, that is in the past. Though, if he really wants to marry my Masumi, he has to pass certain tests. Tests? Echoed everyone involved. Mother? Questioned Serenity. Queen Serenity IV had a thoughtful look. She knew that throughout the years, Serenity became very close with Luffy and eventually fell in love with him, just like in the Silver Millennium with Prince Endymion V. She also knew that the agreement that she set up between the Moon and Earth was that of the past. However, she also knew that Mamoru will not stop in gaining Serenity's hand in marriage, just like with Luffy. Both boys were very stubborn when it came to something they wanted, for she saw their stubborn streak within the Silver Millennium and the present. Both could have been half-brothers for all she knew. When she came back into reality, she saw that all eyes were on her. Mamoru Oji, in this time, I have already betrothed my Masumi to another, confessed Queen Serenity. Demo, started Mamoru. Please let me finish, said Queen Serenity with stern eyes. Gomen, muttered Mamoru. Now, as I was saying, said Queen Serenity, because you were not reborn within our kingdom, I thought the Ginzuisho did not reincarnated you. Thus, we find ourselves in this mess. Because you and the other betrothal want my Masumi's hand in marriage, I propose tests of sorts. I will say that the final test, however, will be a duel between you and the other. It will show everyone who can protect my Masumi better. Mamoru nodded his head as he contemplated on who the other suitor would be. He knew that he will win, however. He knew that his love with Serenity in the past will prevail. He was that confident. Hotaru, on the other hand, narrowed her eyes. It seems as though things will become messy within the Silver Moon Kingdom Island once this small entourage comes within its magical barrier. She, however, knew that Ace and Sabo are probably thinking about sabotaging Mamoru. Tuning back to reality, she heard Akainu suggesting that more Marines come onto the island, along with another celestial dragon. Queen Serenity IV, however, shot that down because she knew there will be a bloodbath within her borders and wanted to prevent it as much as possible. Why wouldn't you want the Marines to come in? Questioned Akainu. Well, we were preparing Serenity's wedding to the other suitor until Mamoru here showed back up, said Queen Serenity. It is housing the wedding guests. You also do not want a panicked crowd, piped up Garp, especially when I am already housing your enemies, said Queen Serenity. After all, the other suitor is a famed pirate. Pirate, yelled out Akainu, the now loud Sengoku, Mamoru, and Jalmik. How could you betroth a wonderful girl with a ruffian, exclaimed Jalmik. Luffy is not a ruffian, bit back Serenity. Luffy, murmured Sengoku before, don't tell me it's Strafut Luffy. Turns to Garp. Garp, did you know about this? Well, said Garp with a finger in his nose, why did you think I took a vacation to the island, Senny? Sengoku sighed as he heard what Garp said. Of course, Garp would know that his only biological grandson is marrying to a princess of an island that the world government wanted to control. Akainu growled lowly as he thought about Strafut Luffy. If this island is housing pirates, did that mean that the island itself is an enemy to absolute justice? Akainu narrowed his eyes as some lava was forming. However, he paused his anger as the tip of a glaive, of all things, and two flaming fists were directed at his neck. Don't even try to harm Her Majesty, said Sabo. I apologize about my temper, said Akainu. Akainu, said Queen Serenity, if you cannot control yourself within my kingdom, then I will banish you to the other side of the world. I shall try, said Akainu. As he said that, the others could still see Akainu tensing in anger. Ace and Sabo glared behind their masks before flanking Queen Serenity IV. Hotaru, too, went back to guard Serenity in the front while glaring hatefully at Akainu. No way was she going to let Akainu destroy her family, again. Serenity looked upset at the thought of Akainu almost harming her mother before crossing her arms and turning her face away, anger still radiating from her. Though, when she turned her face, her glare within her eyes was directed at Mamoru, who winced. He knew that his beloved from the Silver Millennium was very displeased by the Marine Admiral in front of her and blamed him for bringing him to the meeting in the first place. Anyo, said Mamoru, shall we go onto the island to start these tests? You need to meet Monkey D. Luffy first, Mamoru Oji, chided Queen Serenity, it's common courteous to meet your rival before I administer the first test. Hi, said Mamoru. Well, then, said Jalmik, let's go to this so-called island. I also would like a wondrous view of the island in my guest room. We'll see, said Queen Serenity. Yeah right, scoffed the siblings in their heads, just wait until you actual get into your room, selfish, egotistical. Chapter 24, many discussions throughout the night. I don't like him, proclaimed Sanji as he pulled out a cigarette to smoke. When the royals and guardians came back with Mamoru, his present father, and Akainu in tow, all of the pirates were tense. Akainu, in all his wisdom, was muttering quite loudly how pirates are scum that should not have polluted the Silver Moon Kingdom Island, let alone the open sea. Most, if not all, of the pirates that encountered the group bristled at what Akainu was saying. They, however, were taken aback when Mamoru scolded Akainu, along with his father, before apologizing on their behalf. The other pirates, especially the Strafuts who were in town, could see that the apology was a bit forced, if a bit fake. Now, it was nighttime on the island, and everyone, besides certain people, were gathered together to discuss what is to happen. I agree with the arrow cook, said Zoro, there's something about that past prince that just rubs me the wrong way. I agree with him, said Shanks, we all know that his apology wasn't nearly as sincere as it could be. Really? Questioned Luffy confusedly. Lu, sighed Ace, this is a guy who is trying to take your fiancée away. He's not getting her, exclaimed Luffy, besides, USA-chan likes me better. I guess so, said Sabo with a shrug, Demo, we also have to make sure that you win whatever Serenity haha mother is planning. Luffy, upon hearing this, had a determined face on. He wasn't going to let the past dictate what Serenity and him have, especially on the upcoming future. He was looking forward to marry Serenity ever since he first laid eyes on her as a child. He knew that she was the one for him. As everyone saw Luffy's determined face, they couldn't help but remember how his looks right now was what he usually puts before a big battle in one-said battles. They smiled fondly at Luffy's determination before they all focused on the now. "So, how is Luffy here going to win, Captain?" questioned Ducky Bree. "He's Luffy," said Ace with a shrug. "Does he have to do anything besides being himself?" "EA," said Robin, "it is true that Luffy is unconsciously charismatic, yet we do know about the prince's personality." "Rakan?" questioned Shanks. "Rakan," confirmed Yasop. "I don't trust Akainu to letting the Marines stay where they are while Queen Serenity IV conducts these trials." "You and me both," said Dragon roughly. "Koala can help you with that." "EA," said Luffy suddenly, "let Usopp do it. He and Yasop can make this into a father-son bonding." Usopp looked at Luffy in gratitude. It was a couple of days on the island, and he was finally able to bond with his dad. Even though this one was about Rakan that would be at the edge of the barrier of the island, he was still grateful for Luffy and thinking about him spending more time with his dad and giving him an important job, making sure the Marines keep out of the island. Usopp also saw his dad nod his head in agreement as well, thus swelling the warmth that grew from Luffy giving him this important role. "I won't let you down, Luffy," said Usopp. "Shishishi," laughed Luffy, "I know that, Usopp. I just also want you to spend time with your dad since you haven't seen him in so long." "Arigato, Luffy," said Usopp who was straining not to cry. "So, how can we help?" questioned Koala. "I mean, the Senshi are probably going to be patrolling anyways." "Hi," said Ben, "Demo, we still have to assume that the Senshi still remembers the past prince. They could very well try to steer Princess Serenity V to marry him instead of Luffy." "Not on my watch," growled Ace and Sabo protectively. While the pirates were planning and making sure Luffy knew enough to just be himself, Queen Serenity IV and Princess Serenity V were in Princess Serenity's bedroom, the mother combing Serenity's hair. The queen could tell that there was tension between the two as the mother took care of the long hair before Serenity went to bed. She could tell that Serenity would love for her to dissolve the past betrothal, yet she couldn't do that. She had to make sure that this would be fair to both parties, that no hard feelings will come from this confusion. Placing down the comb, Queen Serenity IV turned to her daughter and started the discussion. "You are angry at me," said Serenity IV. "Wouldn't you be if you were already in love with another, yet your mother hid a secret from you until now," snarked back Serenity V. "Hi," said Serenity IV, "I would have." "Then, why, Kachan," said Serenity V, "did you hide this secret from me?" "I saw how in love you were with Luffy," said Serenity IV, "I saw that this marriage between you and Luffy wasn't that of a child's declaration. I saw how the relationship would have worked." Demo, the other prince just had to reappear," sighed Serenity V. Queen Serenity IV nodded her head. During the years that her daughter, Luffy, Ace, Sabo, and Hotaru hung out, she could tell that the relationship would flourish. Luffy and her daughter pushed the betrothal away from their minds and were playing as little kids should. That relationship grew into friendship and siblingship, depending on the child. She also saw how her daughter slowly, but surely, fell in love with Luffy. She couldn't remember a time that her daughter in the past fell for Prince Endymion V slowly. The relationship those two had fell into felt too quick in her opinion, yet she couldn't deny how happy and in love Princess Serenity V was with Prince Endymion V long ago, until that tragedy happened. "I am sorry for putting this burden on you, Masumi," said Serenity IV. Demo, "I also had to think that if I did break this union between you and the past prince, he would do something drastic. This way, he knows he has a chance and will not do anything rash. Like set a buster call on our kingdom," said Serenity V. "Exactly," said Serenity IV, "even I do not know if the Ginzuisho's powers could hold our barriers when that order is called." "You wouldn't also want all the innocent people who live on our island to die either," said Serenity V. Demo, "you might use the Ginzuisho's powers to send everyone into the future, again." "Hi," said Serenity IV, "I would." Demo, "You would die and I would never see or remember you if you did that again," said Serenity V before hugging her mother. "I wouldn't want to lose you like we almost lost Ace." Queen Serenity IV had a seldom look. She couldn't promise that she wouldn't use the Ginzuisho like that again, for she didn't know what the future would hold. Likely scenario would be Mamoru feeling hurt and still call a war upon their lands. She was sure the Senshi could fight the Devil Fruit users with their magic, yet there are some Devil Fruit users that are much craftier than the combat the Senshi uses. Hugging her daughter closely, she stroked Serenity's long hair. "Masumi," said Serenity IV, "I can try not to use it, but there will come a day that I will have to. Just know that I shall make sure that you remember my love for you." "Kachan," muttered Serenity V, tears threatening to fall down. For now, said Serenity IV, I would like for you to give Mamoru a chance during these trials I will set up with Pluto. Hummed Serenity V, I shall try. That's all I ask for, Masumi, said Serenity IV, now, then. It is time for bed, and while you sleep, I shall be talking to Pluto about the upcoming trials. Hi, Kachan, said Serenity V, though a bit solemn in answering. As the mother ushered the daughter to bed, Akainu, Mamoru, and Saint Jalmik were talking in the guest room that was provided by them. Jalmik was complaining about how small the guest room was, even though it could hold all three of them together. He was also complaining about how there was no view of the ocean from the window. If it wasn't for being their protector, Akainu would have stormed out and demanded a different room from the celestial dragons. Yet, Akainu, on his part, was fiddling with a Den Mushi. He was contemplating on relaying messages to the other marines to come onto the island incognito so that they would have an upper hand against the pirates. You should have pushed more on this queen to let the marines come to the island, said Jalmik pointedly. Tosin, groaned out Mamoru. It's true, said Jalmik, the marines would better protect us from the scum that are here. Even if that's true, said Mamoru, the queen, if I remember, is quite stubborn. She would think that you were going to invade and harm her citizens. Pirates as citizens, questioned Akainu before scoffing, they are beings who should be put down permanently. I'm not talking about the pirates, said Mamoru, did you realize that there are other people, innocent people, that live on the island as well? Saint Jalmik scowled at what Mamoru said. Of course, he saw the petulant people that reside permanently on the island. He, however, saw them as nothing more than slaves that should be bought by the celestial dragons long ago. If it wasn't for some sort of trick to make the island disappear and for the queen to always veto the celestial dragons coming onto the island, the celestial dragons would have new slaves for their homes at Mariajoy. Akainu, on his part, stayed silent as he thought that these people who invited pirates openly were just as guilty in obstructing absolute justice. Mamoru also saw another glint in Akainu's eyes before calling him out. And don't call that Blackbeard guy just to stir up trouble here, said Mamoru with a glare, I don't want bloodshed until after my wedding to Serenity Heim. I wasn't going to, said Akainu. I saw that glint in your eye, Akainu, said Mamoru with a scowl, you were planning to tell Blackbeard where the island is to make trouble. You were also thinking that if he came to cause trouble, you would blame the queen for even inviting these pirates to her island in the first place. You know that they are scum, the lowest of the low, Mamoru-san, said Akainu. I don't want trouble until after our wedding, said Mamoru, then, you can do whatever you want with them afterwards. Besides, there is only one way out, and that's where the marines will be to give these pirates trouble later on. The pirates would also believe the queen set them up to be captured or set them up to die, said a thoughtful Akainu. Hi, said Mamoru, and Tosin. No making slaves with the people. Demo, started Jalmik. Besides, said Mamoru, after I get married, we'll have more exotic people as slaves. The queen is not the queen of this island. Oh no, she is the most powerful queen to rule the entire solar system. Solar system, you say, questioned Jalmik, you forgot to mention this when you told me about the Silver Millennium. Demo, it is as good as any to get more information, nay, Masuko. Tell us more about being the ruler of a solar system. As Mamoru finally told the old age secret about Queen Serenity IV still being the ruler of the entire solar system, the Tenshi on the island being proof of that fact, Garp and Sengoku held grimaced faces on while Kobe and Helmeppo were frantic. Before they met up with Sengoku and the other marines, the three marines who were already on the island suggested in having listening devices within the room that they would give to Akainu for just-in-case situations. Though, what the four heard in a different guest room that fit all four together comfortably was quite shocking. That Mamoru guy, growled out Garp, only marrying my granddaughter for power. And, they were thinking about bringing that traitor onto the island, questioned a shocked Sengoku. I think there are far more screws loose in Akainu's head, said Garp with a frown on his face. What are we going to do, questioned Helmeppo, should we tell the queen? Tomorrow, said Garp, tomorrow, we'll tell our allies. Allies, questioned Sengoku, don't tell me you are siding with the revolutionaries and the pirates. Of course, I am, Seni, said Garp, Queen Serenity is also making sure that I can live here permanently when things go south. Sengoku looked at Garp and couldn't fault him for siding with the revolutionaries and the pirates. Not only did Garp have connections within the two, he could tell that Garp could not, go up against his family once more. He was just happy that Garp has somewhere to go when things go south. He didn't know if the island will disappear after the trials, yet he hoped that if it did, he would also be there with him. Sengoku took a glance at Kobe and Helmeppo. He was glad the two were very loyal to Garp, Yet he wondered, why is Kobe and Helmeppo permitted to be on this island, questioned Sengoku. Oh, that, said Garp nonchalantly as he relaxed quickly, Kobe and Helmeppo are friends with my grandson. Luffy invited them to the wedding as well. So, they, too, have a permit to come and go within the island as they please. They, started Sengoku before, when did they become friends? Ah, said Garp with a thoughtful look, Kobe met my grandson when he started his pirate life. Helmeppo was the same, though I don't know how he is friends with Luffy. Sengoku groaned while Garp started to laugh at the thought. A marine and a pirate being friends. Though, since this is Luffy, Sengoku just sighed in exasperation. He knew that Luffy could befriend anyone by just being himself. Maybe that's why the queen let her daughter marry Luffy in the first place. With that confirmed thought, Sengoku nodded his head to just accept the crazy things that keep on happening as a Luffy thing. So, you want to know who our other allies are, questioned Garp. There are more, questioned Sengoku. Ah, said Garp, we have the Alabasta Kingdom, the Fishman Kingdom, and Dressrosa Kingdom as allies too. How did you get those, gaped Sengoku. Luffy saved those kingdoms from corruption, said a laughing Garp, thus, the alliances. Like a true marine. And you were just now telling me this, questioned Sengoku, Garp. Biwahahaha, laughed Garp while Sengoku sighed in exasperation. Chapter 25, Revelation upon Revelations. I see, said a worried Queen Serenity. True to his words, Garp gathered the kings of the allied kingdoms, Shanks, Ben, Dragon, Sabo, and Ace into the throne room. Queen Serenity IV was nursing a cup of tea when 12 people came into her throne room. She raised an eyebrow as she motioned for her oldest and dearest friend, Sailor Pluto, to seal the throne room doors. If Garp came in with 3 marines, the kings of Alabasta, Dressrosa, and Fishman Island, Ace, Sabo, Shanks, Ben, the new Whitebeard captain, and the leader of the Revolutionary Army, she knew whatever Garp was going to say wasn't going to be pretty. Sailor Pluto just solemnly shot a sad look at Queen Serenity IV as she used her Dark Dome close attack to lock the throne room temporarily. Once Garp knew that the throne room was secured, he then proceeded to tell everyone what Sengoku, Kobe, Helmeppo, and he listened into, minus whatever Mamoru sprouted about why he wanted to marry Serenity. Those lying, started Shanks. Calm yourself, Shanks, said Ben, remember that we have plans for this. Oh, questioned Queen Serenity, do tell. Well, said Shanks with a scratch of his head, we sent Usopp and Yasop to reckon the marines that are just outside the barrier. We wanted to map out what the marines may be doing on their ships while Luffy is doing the trials, Your Majesty. Also, said Dragon, we made sure that this information is passed towards one of my own subordinates who will then give it to one of the Senshi that are on lookout. Pluto, questioned Queen Serenity. Hi, said Pluto, it's true that they are doing this. The information is passed from Yasop and Usopp to the Revolutionary Koala and Hack. Those two then find whichever Senshi, barring the inners, the information while our Senshi pass it on to a Mercurian, Uranian, or Jupiterian for further planning. Everyone, besides Queen Serenity IV and Pluto, blinked at what Pluto informed them. Those that were planning late last night didn't realize that Pluto and the other Senshi came up with more planning than what they were doing. Ace and Sabo smirked to each other as they realized that the Senshi were making contingency plans for just-in-case situations. It just confirmed from Ace and Sabo that the Senshi did remember the tragedy that hit the Silver Millennium in the past. Are you truly? Questioned King Cobra. Hi, said Pluto, after all, we do not want the same results happening in this timeline than when we were all alive during the Silver Millennium. Ah, said a sheepish Shanks, I forgot about that tidbit. Well, said Ace, I, for one, am glad the Senshi are stepping up, yet how come the inners aren't in on it, especially when one of the inners is Mercury? Ace does have a point, said Sabo. The inners, said Pluto with a sigh, cannot be trusted with sensitive information. Why? Questioned Marco, because I was sure that all Senshi would be trusted. Queen Serenity IV and Pluto looked at each other in resignation. They knew that the inners were trustworthy to some extent. Yet, they also knew that the inners weren't good with secrets, especially Venus. Venus had a big mouth on her. Just look at what happened with Princess Serenity V and Luffy's arranged marriage. Venus just took off to tell her fellow inners on what was happening, leading to Mars and Jupiter to gossip about it in the open as well. That led to everyone in the kingdom knowing the gossip just before Queen Serenity IV could even make the announcement. Even though Mercury was the only one fine to have the information, she was always with one of the inners unless she was doing therapy sessions with Ace. So, yes, the inners were not to be trusted with sensitive information. They can be trusted to an extent, said Pluto, however, they cannot, for their entire lives, keep secrets. Yeah, said Ace, I can understand that. You can, questioned everyone not in the known. Yeah, said Sabo, same here. I can remember the marriage thing getting out before everything could be finalized. I mean, it only took one day just for the entire kingdom to know, despite Saranghae not announcing it until everything was finalized. Really? Exclaimed a surprised Ben. Nodded Ace and Sabo together. Wouldn't that be inconsiderate of them to spread that without confirmation? Questioned Marco. This is a teenage girl whose pastime is spreading gossip, said a deadpanned Ace. A teenage girl who was also supposed to stay at her post as a guard for Saranghae and as his kids, said an equally deadpanned Sabo. A teenage girl who decided to spread gossip instead of doing her job, said a still deadpanned Ace. A teenage girl who started up a deadpanned Sabo again before being interrupted. I believe they get the gist of it, said an amused Pluto. Even though I do not like to speak ill of my fellow Senshi, Ace and Sabo make a point that the inners still act like teenage gossiping girls. That is why we do not give secretive information to the inners. Everyone who didn't know the inners just nodded their heads. If Pluto thought it would be impudent to not include the 4 inner Senshi, then they will not include them until the very end. They discussed more on what to do and if they could help, while Garp sighed inwardly with relief that there were contingency plans after Pluto's revelations about the hidden information. Hopefully, Usopp and Yasop were good enough to spy on the Marines that were outside of the barrier. Hopefully, the Marines were also smart enough to not try to come into the island without permission. This was, after all, a kingdom that was run by royalty. The Marines needed good relations with royalty. With a nod to that thought, Garp stretched and stood up. Now that that is out of the way, said Garp, I would like to talk with Ace and Sabo. Oh, questioned Queen Serenity with a raised eyebrow. Hi, said Garp, can't a grandpa bond with his grandsons that he hasn't seen in a long time? Should I go and fetch Luffy? Questioned Pluto with amused eyes. Nah, said Garp, Luffy is probably with Serenity, and he needs all the help he can get in these so-called trials you and Queenie here are cooking up for that Mamoru guy and him. Well, if this serious discussion is out of the way, said King Dold, shall you, Cobra, Neptune, and I continue with our talks about an alliance? Of course, said King Neptune, I am sure that we will have a very strong alliance between our 4 kingdoms. Indeed, said Queen Serenity. In a different room. What do you mean he's just using Serenity? After leaving the throne room, Ace and Sabo were reluctant to follow their grandfather to an abandoned room. They felt like he was going to give them his signature fist of love that was not missed by the 2 brothers. The only way they could have always avoided that fist was due to Queen Serenity IV not tolerating any kind of abusive training from said grandfather. Now, however, Queen Serenity IV wasn't going to save them from his powerful fist. Both also knew that if they ran away from their grandpa, Garp will just chase after them while tearing up their mother figures home before landing much stronger fist of loves on top of their heads. They, however, weren't prepared for Garp to lead them to said unoccupied room and proceed to tell them what Mamoru was actually planning to do to their baby sister. I'm going to kill him, said Ace with dark eyes. I'll help, said Sabo. Now, you two, said Garp, you can't just kill off a celestial dragon. Why not, whined the 2. Baka idiots, yelled Garp as he hit the 2 over the head, hard. Itai, out, yelped the brothers. Going after the celestial dragon, especially that one, all willy-nilly will make problems for Queen Serenity IV and her kingdom, said Garp. Ace and Sabo clutched their heads while listening to Garp rant about how their actions would bring a buster call upon their mother figure and little sister's home. Both of them glowered as their shoulders slumped. They didn't think about the consequences of something like the Marines' attack on the kingdom would come out from their actions. They just wanted to protect their baby sister from a guy who was undoubtedly using her as a means to rule the entire universe. That admission also had them reeling with inward shock. They didn't know that their Serenity would be the next to rule the entire solar system once she has been married and handed the throne. So, what do you propose, old geezer, sneered Ace. We have to do this subtly, said Garp, to expose his true colors. Ha, laughed Sabo, fat lot that would do. No offense, Gramps, Demo, you have never been a subtle guy. Ace is worst, though. Hey, said an offended Ace, I can be subtle. Ace, said a deadpan Sabo, you literally can't. Ace glared at Sabo while Sabo gave a toothy grin at Ace. Garp, on his part, laughed out loud at the admission his second elder grandson just said to his oldest. He could tell that Ace was embarrassed by what Sabo said about him. Yet, at least Ace knew when to be subtle, unlike Luffy. Luffy was much more brash than Ace and reckless to boot, too. Garp, however, also knew that Luffy could and would do anything for his nakama, his family, once he set his mind to it. As if knowing what Garp was thinking, Sabo voiced it out loud. At least, you aren't Lu, said Sabo. Yeah, said Ace with a sigh, Lu can never be subtle. Nodded Sabo, we always had to plan for Luffy chaos. So true, sighed Ace once more. So, are you two done or would like to continue to banter with each other, asked Garp with a raised eyebrow. We're done, Gramps, said Sabo. Good, said Garp, because I just know that you will like this next bit. Ace and Sabo looked at each other wearily before paying close attention to Garp's plan. It was simple enough of a plan that not even Luffy would mess it up. However, the brothers knew that something chaotic would happen even with Garp's plan in motion. Garp, on the other hand, was overjoyed that the two were finally listening to him, even if it's a plan that may or may not work due to Luffy chaos. I guess that's a good plan, said Ace. Yeah, said Sabo, angering the celestial dragon to the point of him spilling his dark secret is a better plan than what we would have done. I still say we should drag him into the training room and mess him up a bit, said Ace who crossed his arms. Same here, said Sabo, Demo, Gramps is right that we shouldn't do that, for Saranghae's sake. Fine, grumbled Ace, I won't actively try to hurt that stupid prince guy for Saranghae's sake. Why not for my sake, asked Garp with a barely noticeable whine. Why would we do that for your sake, Baka Gigi, mocked Ace. Yeah, Gigi, said Sabo, you aren't the nice one. Why you too, growled out Garp before, fist of love. Itai. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is The Princess and the Pirate by Saranghae Tenshi. Chapter 26, Secret Meeting with an Unexpected Person. During the so-called meetups, one single person quietly left the room as he was in as this person slinked down the hall. He looked around to see if he was being followed before heading straight towards another room, Princess Serenity's bedroom. This person sighed in relief that he left whoever he was talking to. The person couldn't wrap her head around what his guests were thinking about. He was so wrapped up in her thoughts that he didn't notice that he passed the room he was trying to get to. It wasn't until the door opened with Luffy and Serenity looking out to see him just walk past said room. Oi hey, called out Serenity, you passed my room, Baka. Baka yanai, I'm not an idiot, said the person, cheeks flushing slightly. Shishishi, laughed Luffy, if USA-chan says you are, then it is true. I don't want to hear it from you, Luffy, said a practically yelling person, besides, I've never been on the island before, unlike you. I'm going to get lost once in a while. Oh yeah, said Luffy in realization. The person who was talking to Serenity and Luffy sighed in exasperation before heading to the door. Looking around to check once more that he wasn't followed or that her yelling didn't draw attention, he quickly pushed the two back into the room before going into the room herself, the door practically slamming. The person was also lucky to be in the room because after he closed the door, certain people were turning the corner, talking to each other about plans in making sure the Silver Moon Kingdom Island survive in the near future. Upon closing the door, said person looked around the room and, you sure have a lot of plushies, Odango, said the person. Urusai, shut up, said Serenity with a glare. Nah, said the person with a grin, I'll still tease you like a good Onisan is, Odango. Ace is a much better Onisan than you, said Serenity with her arms crossed, and Sabo too. They don't tease me or call me names. Yeah, agreed Luffy, Ace and Sabo are the best. The person groaned at the reminder of the Fire Duo brothers. They were going to be a pain in his side for this conundrum. Why did he have to remember memories from a past life anyways? The person sighed as he pulled out Serenity's desk chair, flipped it around, and sat down, the chairs back to Luffy and Serenity's view. He waited for Luffy and Serenity to get comfortable on Serenity's bed before he spoke to the two. Serenity, on her part, huffed as she sat on her bed while Luffy jumped onto the bed. It almost made Serenity fall off of the bed, but with Luffy's quick reflexes and stretchy arms, she was pulled into his side quickly and without injury. I still marvel at the sight of your devil fruit, Luffy, said the person. You should get one, Mamoru, said a cheerful Luffy to the now-known Mamoru, we could have a battle on whose devil fruit powers are the oesamest. I rather keep to my golden crystal, thanks, said Mamoru dryly. Golden crystal, questioned Luffy, what's that? It's a crystal that was passed down to the Royal Earth family for millennia, explained Mamoru. A mystery crystal then, chirped Luffy. You could call it that, said Mamoru, even I don't know how powerful my crystal is. Though, speaking of Royal Earth families, said Serenity before fiercely glaring at Mamoru, why didn't you tell Lu and me that you were a reincarnate? Or the fact you were engaged to me in a past life? Mamoru sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. He honestly thought that Serenity knew about her past life and thought she just chose Luffy over him. Not that he is complaining. After receiving the past memories for some unknown reason, he blames the fates. Mamoru was fine with Serenity being with Luffy. He already accepted them as friends and a cute couple when they were teenagers. It felt just like yesterday that he met Luffy and Serenity on Dawn Island. Flashback. I'm lost, grumbled a 16-year-old Mamoru. When his father took him with him to Dawn Island, he was ecstatic. He was finally going to bond with his father, Saint Jalmik. Yet, when the duo pair stepped out of the ship, his father was accosted by some people called Outback. Outtalk, well, something with an out in their names. Mamoru was so not pouting when his father left him alone to his own devices. He glared at the people that accosted his father before leaving for an adventure of a sort. Too bad that he had this stupid bubble bowl around his head. He rather smells the flowers and the open air than whatever breath he has. Walking around, however, was a bad sign as he ventured out into the forest that was connected to the grand place and ended up getting lost. Tosen must be getting worried about me, sighed Mamoru, who kicked the ground, though with those people kissing up to him, he probably doesn't remember that I exist. Roar, yelled out a fierce animal. Get him, Lu, shouted an excited female voice. Shishishi, laughed a male voice, don't worry, USA-chan. I'll beat this animal up good, and then we can have bear meat. Just remember not to try to hit the bear in my direction again, said the female voice. Mamoru jumped when he heard that loud growl coming from an animal. He was also surprised to hear a young male and female voice talking, the male voice having a lot of excitement in his tone. The females had an underline worried and exasperation rolled into one. Taking his feet towards the voices, he came upon a 13-year-old girl sitting on a rock that was further away from the clearing. His eyes stared a bit at how pretty the girl was before turning towards the male. He guessed that the boy was a year older than the female, and as he looked towards where the male was looking, he gaped in surprise. There, in front of the male, was a huge bear that he thought only resided near his area of the oceans, the Grand Line. Mamoru continued to gape until he was pushed away by an outstretched arm. The younger male apparently accidentally hit the bear and it was coming towards him in a fast pace before hitting the ground hard and unmoving. Arigato, said Mamoru, who was still staring at the arm that was moving back into place. No problem, said the male. Demo, why do you have a fish bowl over your head? Luffy, said an exasperated female. What? Asked a now known curious Luffy. Never mind, said the female before turning to Mamoru, are you alright? Sorry about my boyfriend for almost hurting you with the bear. Ah, right, said Luffy before laughing in his own way, sorry about that. Though, to be fair, why were you standing in the middle of the clearing where you could have gotten hurt? Also, I still want to know about that fish bowl. You said Mamoru, it's fine. Though that arm, what are you? I'm a rubber man, said a laughing Luffy who pulled his cheek wide. Yelled out Mamoru in shock. End flashback. Though, I can't believe Luffy took away the bubble bowl when one explained what it was after introductions, thought Mamoru with a sweat drop. At least, Tosen wasn't there for our first meeting. As Mamoru reminisced, he didn't notice that Luffy and Serenity were still waiting for an answer about his past memories. Serenity, on her part, could tell that Mamoru was lost in thought as she silently waited patiently for him to answer. Luffy, though, was not patient as well as he furrowed his eyebrows together. Over time at the first meeting, he gotten to know Mamoru and could confidently say that he was like an older brother to Serenity. He also knew that Mamoru wasn't like all those other stuffy celestial dragons that had harmed his big brother Sabo, yet he also really wanted to know just why Mamoru would try to claim Serenity for himself. Serenity is his pirate queen and will stay that way. Mamo, called out Luffy impatiently, answer USA-chan's questions. Gomen, said Mamoru, just lost in thought. Not the time for that, Mamo, said Luffy with a pout. Yeah, said Serenity, what was that all about with, well, everything? Well, as you know, we met each other at Dawn Island, said Mamoru. And, questioned Luffy, who looked bored. I guess, after that first meeting, my past memories started to come back to me in very slow bits and pieces, said Mamoru. And you just had to tell your Tosen, questioned Serenity in exasperation. Hey, Odango, said Mamoru, he's still my father in this life. Not a good one, but still mine. Serenity sighed but nodded her head. If she thought about it, Mamoru probably wasn't going to actually try to claim her hand in marriage. It was probably his father that wanted a ticket into the Silver Moon Kingdom Island. She knew that Luffy and she invited only Mamoru to come onto the island for their marriage. Hey, Mamoru was practically the one who, though accidentally, gave the so-called big brother talk to Luffy after a certain heated makeout session one time. That solidified his relationship with Serenity, while Luffy, after that talk, shook a bit from the fierceness of Mamoru's tone. Shouldn't have told him, said Luffy, could have also snuck away to our wedding so we didn't have this mess too. Says the guy who creates chaos wherever he goes, said Mamoru with a raised eyebrow. No, I don't, said Luffy, chaos always finds me. Isn't the saying open corner bracket trouble always finds me close corner bracket, questioned Serenity. That too, said Luffy. So, you are telling me that you declared war on the world government because of trouble and chaos, questioned Mamoru. Yeah, said Luffy with a huff, the Marines were being meanies. They took Robin from us. Punching a celestial dragon, said Mamoru before muttering, even though he was a. He was trying to sell Kami, said Luffy with a pout, and shot at my friends. Da Flamingo, prompted Mamoru. Turao needed help, said Luffy before puffing proudly, we're friends. I thought it was an alliance, questioned Serenity. Friends sounds much better, said Luffy. As Mamoru and Luffy conversed about Luffy's adventures, Serenity smiled. She was still bitter about Mamoru being her past ex-fiancé, yet she also knew that it wasn't his fault that he started to remember. Luffy was still the same lovable person that Mamoru approved of right before Luffy set sail. Yet, he still reprimanded Luffy on giving Serenity a lot of heart attacks and heartaches. Luffy, on his part, still reassured Mamoru that Serenity was the only one for him before pulling Serenity into his embrace and not letting go. Usagi is the only one for me, said Luffy, and you can't have her. Did I ever said that I would want her, questioned Mamoru. Yeah, said Luffy, demo. My Tosen is the reason why this is happening, said Mamoru, and Gomen for causing you both grief with this entire situation. As long as you didn't tell your Tosen about Mama and how far her kingdom does expand, joked Serenity. Ahahaha, laughed Mamoru awkwardly, about that, I may have told him that tidbit. Mamo ni, exclaimed Serenity with a groan. Wow, said Luffy, you are a baka. Before Mamoru could refute Luffy's claim with a open corner bracket takes one to know one type of response, a resounding knock from the door stopped all conversation between the three. Luffy and Serenity were a given to be in the bedroom. However, Mamoru should have been with Akainu and his father. All three held their breaths just as a rough female voice came out from the door. Luffy, said the female voice, Kaneko kitten. It's time to gather for the first trial. Hi, called out the couple. Be there soon, Uranus, said Serenity. Of course, said Uranus from the door before walking away. Now, to find Prince Endymion. I guess that's our cue to become enemies once more, Luffy, said Mamoru. Don't think I'll go easy on you either, Mamo, said Luffy with a feral grin. Yeah, said Mamoru, come on, you two. Let's get this show on the road. I bet even your snipers are doing lookout for the Marines. How did you know, gaped Luffy in awe. Intuition, said Mamoru. Huh, questioned Luffy. Never mind, said Mamoru with Serenity giggling behind her hand. Chapter 27, Interlude, Happy Pocky Day. The first kiss. Usagi, shouted out Luffy, where are you? Luffy, who just turned 14 this year, was getting back from the party bar, back from hearing something really interesting about what today is from Makino, the nice lady that watched over him since he was very little. Today was something called Pocky Day, a day to eat something sweet with your loved ones. Luffy didn't know what Pocky was, but Makino said that she would bake some for Luffy to share with Serenity and Hotaru. After a couple of hours of Makino baking and retelling Luffy what Pocky Day was, Luffy, with a bag of Pocky, set out to find Hotaru and Serenity. Though, he was more into trying to find Serenity than Hotaru. He, sadly, could only find Hotaru who was helping an old woman carry her groceries. Luffy, said Hotaru, why are you shouting for Serenity? I have a bag of sweets that I want to share with her, said Luffy with a pout. Well, she's probably near somewhere quiet, said Hotaru, you know her habits. Yeah, said Luffy, you don't think she's in the forest by herself, do you? Who knows, said Hotaru, though, if she is, you better hurry to go and protect her. Aren't you her protector too, teased Luffy with a silly grin on his face. Not when she wants to be by herself, said Hotaru, besides, I can tell if she is in danger. It's perks of being connected to Serenity as a senshi. Luffy pouted at that. He was kind of jealous that Hotaru had a way to always know just where Serenity was. He really wanted to have a power like that. He could also use that bond to sneak up on Serenity before giving her a hug and dragging her to another adventure, him protecting her throughout said adventures. Luffy bid Hotaru goodbye and ran towards the path that led into the forest. He could just remember that Ace and he would run into the forest while Hotaru and Serenity would try to catch up. By remembering, he could also feel the small loneliness that he has ever since Ace set out to sea 2 months ago. It wasn't really the same without his big brother with him and always lecturing him on how to actually woo Serenity. He did hope that Ace was having a good time wherever he was at sea. Luffy shook his head mentally as he continued into the forest to search for Serenity. For 30 minutes, Luffy finally found Serenity, who was actually setting flowers in front of a stone, a familiar stone at that. Luffy gulped as he saw that stone before coming over to Serenity. "There you are," said Luffy with a pout, "I have been trying to find you forever ago." "Luffy," said Serenity with a smile. "Were you here the entire time, Usagi?" questioned Luffy. Nodded Serenity, "I still miss Sabo ni. I'm sure that he's living in found freedom," said Luffy. "He always wanted that, nay, Luffy?" questioned Serenity. Nodded Luffy enthusiastically. Luffy and Serenity stayed quiet while just staring at Sabo's stone. Even though Sabo wasn't here, maybe Luffy could still offer something that might reach him wherever he was. Luffy looked at the bag of Pocky and thought that this would have to do. He could always ask Makino for more if Serenity and he liked the treat. Nodding to himself, Luffy walked closer to the stone before opening the bag. Serenity, on her part, was curious on what Luffy was doing. She was surprised to see a familiar treat come out of the bag before some of them were set in front of Sabo's stone as an offering. "Luffy," said Serenity gently. "Makino said that today was something called Pocky Day," said Luffy. "She made these yummy cookies for me to share with you because according to Makino, she said this was a day to share something sweet with a loved one. Sabo is one of our loved ones, and he should also be allowed to eat something yummy too." "I agree," said Serenity with a smile, "though, I didn't even know Makino knew what Pocky was." "You know what Pocky is?" asked Luffy in excitement. Nodded Serenity, "Mama and Venus told me about today. They said it is a day to convey love and friendship by sharing Pocky sticks, which is what you are doing with Sabo." Luffy had starry eyes as he listened to Serenity saying that this was a day to not be alone and be with someone you are friends with or in love with. He was now glad that Makino introduced him to this day as the couple sat down in front of Sabo to enjoy the treat that Makino baked. Luffy, however, kind of felt guilty about not giving some to Hotaru. He knew that Hotaru was a dear friend, but he was hyper-focused on finding Serenity and sharing the treat with her. Probably once Serenity and he were done with the Pocky they have right now, the couple could get more to share with Hotaru from Makino. Yet, now, Luffy was more interested in eating the Pocky. "Fish is so good," exclaimed Luffy with a mouthful of Pocky. "Makino sure made good Pocky sticks," said Serenity as she took another out of the bag. "I can't believe I didn't know about this," said Luffy, "wonder if Ace knew about this and never told me." "That jerk. He probably doesn't know about this day, Luffy," said Serenity, "after all, you two grew up as wild as those animals you hunt down in this forest." "Hey," said Luffy, "that was freedom at its prime right there." "True," giggled Serenity. Luffy and Serenity spent the day sitting in front of Sabo's stone and eating the Pocky sticks. They also enjoyed being with each other, especially on a significant day. The bag of Pocky sticks, however, grew smaller and smaller until there was only one left. Both Luffy and Serenity looked at each other as their hands touched one another instead of the last Pocky stick. Serenity sighed at that before gesturing Luffy to eat the last one so they could meet up with Hotaru. Luffy, on the other hand, looked at the last stick before looking at Serenity. "Let's share it," said Luffy. Questioned Serenity. "The last Pocky stick," said Luffy, "let's share it together." "You don't want to eat it by yourself," teased Serenity. Said Luffy with some seriousness in his tone, "this treat is for sharing. Even if there is one more stick, let's just eat it together. Besides, there are two sides. We can eat the last one together." Serenity pondered at that before smiling in agreement. She really loved eating Pocky at home and really wanted to eat some more. If Luffy was willing to share the last Pocky stick with her, she wouldn't complain. Luffy cheered at Serenity's smile before holding the stick in between the two. Luffy took one end with his mouth while Serenity took the other end. They, however, didn't know that they were unconsciously going to be doing the Pocky game, a game that had two participants place the Pocky between them and try to be the last to hold onto the biscuit, leading to something special. Both Serenity and Luffy started to eat the Pocky together until it got smaller, and chew. Luffy and Serenity's eyes widened as the Pocky stick dissolved into both of their lips pressing against each other. Serenity's face started to turn red very fast as she broke her lips away from Luffy. "Gee Gomen," said Serenity. Said Luffy, "I'm not mad. It felt nice." "Does this make it our first kiss?" questioned Serenity. "Hi, USA-chan," said Luffy before he turned towards Sabo's stone. "Don't go running and telling people, Sabo. You hear me? You were privileged to witness our first kiss. So, don't go blabbing to Ace about it, okay? I think Sabo heard you," giggled Serenity. "Good," said Luffy who pulled Serenity towards him. "Now, let's go and get more Pocky sticks." I want to do that sharing thing with you again, Yusa. Serenity blushed brightly as Luffy led Serenity away from Sabo's stone. He wants to kiss again, thought Serenity, whose blush was growing brighter and brighter. Years later. Your first kiss was before you even left your island as a pirate, questioned a disbelief Nami. Everyone was together while waiting for Ace to finish his therapy session. Even the Whitebeard pirates were with the Strafuts to learn more about Ace and Sabo's precious baby brother. When they questioned Luffy about his first kiss with Princess Serenity V, Hotaru piped up about their official first kiss was when Luffy was leaving to become the new Pirate King. Everyone looked at Luffy in disbelief at what Hotaru was saying. I don't believe it, said Sanji, our captain is just so innocent. Huh, questioned Luffy, Demo, Hotaru always knows when our firsts was, like our first calls to one another. That was before getting Zoro, nay, Lu, questioned Hotaru. Nodded Luffy. Said Usopp, forget about the first phone calls out to sea. I can't believe you never kissed Serenity until it was time for you to leave your home island. Same, chorused the pirates. Luffy just shrugged his shoulders. He knew that his official first kiss was that Pocky day long ago with Serenity. He, however, would never mention just how that happened. The couple didn't even tell Hotaru about that day. It was just Serenity and his little secret, along with all the other kisses that Hotaru has never seen throughout the years before Luffy turned 17 and set sail. As for the others, well, they were still in disbelief while talking with Hotaru to know more about what happened with Luffy and Serenity. Though, Sabo swore that Luffy was eyeing him weirdly when the topic of first kiss between the engaged couple came up. I wonder what Luffy is hiding if he's eyeing me of all people, thought Sabo. Yup, thought Luffy with a mental nod, no one needs to know about Pocky Day, especially Hotaru. Even if I'm horrible at lying, that first kiss would be our little secret, along with another one. Wonder how Mamoru is doing. Chapter 28, More Group Therapy Revelations. Where is Mercury? Questioned Ace. As the private meeting between grandparent and grandsons were done, Queen Serenity IV quickly reminded Ace that he had a group therapy session with his Spade Pirates and the Whitebeard Pirates before Ace could even get out of the throne room. Ace knew that his mother figure was trying to rile up the Whitebeard Pirates by separating the Spade Pirates and himself from the Whitebeard Pirates through another therapy session, but did she had to do that in front of Marco? Better yet, did she also have to tell Marco to gather his fellow Whitebeard commanders and go to another group therapy session? It, however, wasn't the end of the surprise. Oh, no. The Spade Pirates and Ace got to the meeting room only to pause to see one of the Whitebeard Pirates acting as a medic, a familiar whitish-blue-haired Whitebeard woman. Whitey, sighed Marco. No hello, Marco, questioned Whitey with a smirk, same to you, Ace. I mean, we siblings have to watch each other's backs, especially with people kidnapping you. As I said Ace, who had one eye twitching, where is Mercury? What did you do to her? She's alive, if that's what you are asking, said Whitey, just indisposed. Whitey, I am not playing, said Ace as he motioned for Saber and Deuce to find Mercury. I am not either, said Whitey, come on, Ace. You should have the courtesy to tell your siblings that you were alive and well. Why did you never come back to us? Ace stayed silent as his Spade Pirates began to surround Ace, Kotatsu growling at Whitey. Whitey, on her part, backed up just a bit while looking at the exasperation and anger looks the other Whitebeard commanders were giving her. Sure, the others came to see Luffy marry that princess girl, but they were surprised to hear about an Ace from some people around the island. Whitey wanted to know what they were talking about and started to investigate without communicating with the other commanders. Now, she was enraged that the Ace was the same littlest brother the Whitebeards supposedly lost in that war years ago. It was just luck that she found a blue-haired woman whom was questioning about her being a Whitebeard commander and coming with her for something called a group therapy. Sure, she shouldn't have knocked this Senshi out, but she really wanted to see Ace again. Whitey, said Ace, if you harmed Mercury in any way, you don't have just me to deal with. You have the entire kingdom up in arms. Truly, questioned Thatch nervously. Hi, said Ace, they do not take kindly to someone sneaking into the castle and harming one of their own. Great going Whitey, said an irritated Izo. Demo, said Whitey, Ace should be with us. And that is the reason why he has Stockholm Syndrome, said a female voice. Whitey tensed at the unknown female's voice while the Whitebeard pirates were sighing in relief. They all turned around to see the blue-haired woman that everyone, besides Whitey, was familiar with, Sailor Mercury. Ace took a quick glance over her to assess if there was any other injury that Whitey probably made on her person. He really did not want his Imoto to learn about one of her Senshi being injured due to Whitey and her outrageous plans. He noted mentally that other than a bump to Mercury's head, she had no other injuries. Mercury, said Ace, are you alright? I am fine, Ace-sama, said Mercury, and I shall let this slide once. If this happens a second time, let it be known that the Whitebeard pirates and whoever they call siblings would be punished. Noted, said Marco, who was glaring at Whitey. What? Questioned Whitey, who thought she didn't do anything wrong. The Whitebeard commanders just sighed at Whitey. They all wanted Ace back with them, but Whitey doing her own thing just made things quite difficult. What Whitey did probably set back their own plan of gaining Ace's trust back, of gaining the Spade Pirates' trusts back. Ace and the Spade Pirates were openly glaring at Whitey as Deuce physically checked over Sailor Mercury for injuries. I am alright, Deuce-san, said Mercury. What do you mean Ace has Stockholm Syndrome? Demanded Whitey. Did you and this island's people do something to Ace? Said a sad Thatch, Ace has this syndrome because of us. Bah, mocked Whitey, what lies have they been telling you all? It's not lies, said a fierce Banshee, all of us Spade Pirates developed it after what Whitebeard did to our captain. You're a Whitebeard pirate, shot back Whitey. And this is why we have group therapy sessions sometimes, muttered Ducky Bree. Whitey ignored Ducky Bree's mutterings as she had a knowing look. She knew that she was right, that these pirates are and will always be Whitebeard pirates. However, she didn't see the disappointment in the Whitebeard commanders and the resentment and forlorn looks within Ace and his Spade Pirates. They knew that Whitey's tale about joining the Whitebeards was vastly different than the Spade Pirates' tale. Sailor Mercury could see that Whitey was proud about being a Whitebeard pirate, even though she made up a subsidiary part of the Whitebeards. You seem quite proud to be a Whitebeard pirate, commented Mercury. Of course, exclaimed Whitey, Pops was the best. If he was the best, continued Mercury, then, why did you form your own pirate crew? I wanted to see the oceans, said Whitey, and Pops gave his blessings for me to go on my own. I see, said Mercury, then, why didn't he just make the Spade Pirates a subsidiary as well? Why didn't he let them explore the oceans together once more after Ace agreed to become his son? As Sailor Mercury started to talk with Whitey and questioning on how she became a subdivision for the Whitebeards, the Spade Pirates looked at each other and started to fume. They knew that Whitey and Jinbei were just two out of how many subsidiaries the Whitebeard pirates had. It was the same with Luffy and his so-called fleet, even if Luffy denies having one. They could have been a subsidiary, yet that didn't happen. Did that mean their own freedom was stolen by the Whitebeards, incorporating them all into different divisions within the huge ship? Ace felt like a failure when he realized that Whitebeard didn't think about his own freedom. Looking back, it looked like the other Whitebeards were on the fence until Ace proved himself to be a reliable son to Whitebeard, having his own freedom disappearing after getting the mark of Whitebeard. You made your point, grumbled King Du. What do you mean, King Du? Asked Whitey, who paused in explaining her own experience about her recruitment. Sailor Mercury-san just proved that we Whitebeards were in the wrong when we have gotten Ace to become our brother, said a subdued Atmos. I have, questioned Mercury, who was smiling innocently at the Whitebeards. As much as I want to deny it, said Blenheim, we were in the wrong by separating Ace and his crew. We were also wrong to restrict the Spade Pirates, said a solemn Curiel. Thus, leading to their stolen freedom, Yoi, said Marco. The rest of the Whitebeard commanders nodded their heads. Thatch had to wince when he thought about how Ace was first hostile before mellowing out. Did that mean they essentially changed Ace's fiery personality? Did that mean they didn't really know the real Ace? The others thought back as well. It seemed like the hostility Ace had just bled away from him after months being on board with them. They, however, knew that when Ace was bragging about his little brother, Luffy, that was genuine at least. Did that mean that we didn't know Ace? Questioned Haruta. Coughed Ace, my personality is just the same. You knew the semi-real me, just a bit subdued because my freedom was essentially taken away. Actually, said Deuce, when we met back up, you looked more subdued. You also wouldn't just fiercely jump towards an adventure. Same observations here, said Banshee, I mean, Captain. When we were together, you would always have a grin on your face. You didn't even ask for our permission. But, that could be because you were our captain. You wanted adventure. Then, commented Hublot, Whitebeard happened, and instead of just going with the flow like you always did, you asked permission to go off to an island. The only time we saw your personality from before was when Teach happened and taking off without permission from Whitebeard himself. We, kind of cheered you on about that stunt, said Skull, well, until the war. Ace winced as he continued to think about how his personality was with Whitebeard. Sure, he still had his grin on his face when he pulled a prank on some other pirates with Haruta and Thatch, sure, he grinned when he finally, read that Luffy was out at sea and kept talking about him to the Whitebeards. Yet, he didn't notice that when there was a place he really wanted to go to, he asked Whitebeard or Marco for permission instead of just going. The Whitebeard commanders winced when they heard the Spade Pirates' observations on their ex-captain. Even Whitey winced when she heard everything that happened with the Spade Pirates, especially Ace. She also knew that she couldn't answer any of Sailor Mercury's questions to the best of her abilities. Heck, even her answers to Sailor Mercury's inquiries were just half-baked and always, leading her to defend Pop's honor. "Gomen," said Ace with his head down. "Why are you sorry, Ace?" questioned Mercury as she wrote what was happening down in her clipboard. "What is there to be sorry about?" "I'm sorry that I was weak," said Ace. "I'm sorry that the Spade Pirates suffered because of my rash decisions. I'm sorry for never noticing how I was acting throughout the 3 years I was with the Whitebeards. I'm sorry that I failed as a captain too." "You did not fail us," said Deuce fiercely. "Yeah," chorused the Spade Pirates. "It wasn't like we knew that the Whitebeards would accuse us of harming that island villagers when you took on Jinbei," said Mahal. "Yeah," said Saber. "Haruta gathered the wrong intel because Jinbei said we harmed them when we saved them. Also, you didn't fail us when we were with the Whitebeard pirates," said Kotatsu. "Sure, we have mild Stockholm Syndrome, yours being the worst captain in," said Leonero. "Demo, we still had a blast as part of the Whitebeards. And we would always follow you, Captain," said Skull. "We'll follow you even when you are a Senshi here," said Deuce. "You are our captain in, and you will always be our captain in." Ace turned his head to the side, but everyone could tell he was getting a bit emotional. Sailor Mercury smiled kindly at the Spade Pirates before turning to watch the Whitebeard Pirates. She noted that they looked very guilty about how they acquired Ace into their crew. She also noted that this Whitey woman was biting her lower lip nervously, especially when she was watching Ace getting into a big group hug by the Spade Pirates. She, however, was surprised to see Thatch launch into the group hug as well. "Wah!" yelped Ace. "Thatch!" "Gomen!" cried out Thatch, who was hugging Ace for dear life. "Gomen, for not accepting your refusal to join the crew and taking away your freedom." "We all are," said a guilty Izo. "Even though this is our North group therapy for all of us, Sailor Mercury is scarily good in bringing out our raw emotions quickly," said Namur. "I want to drink to that," said Rikuyo. "No drinking, Yoi," said Marco with a sigh. "What kind of pirates are we if we don't drink?" mocked Vista. "A sober one," joked Deuce. "True," said Jozu with a laugh. Whitey could see that the commanders were true in their apologies. Just listening to what Ace and his first crew went through gave her some perspective on how wrong Whitebeard was in making Ace his son, willingly or not. Whitey winced when she finally heard that it was actually true that Ace's freedom had got stolen just by being in this group therapy. Though, she wondered if her finding Sailor Mercury was fate playing a hand at pushing the Whitebeards in learning how wrong and guilty they were with her own recruitment into Whitebeard's crew, or was it something else? No one would realize that another Senshi was using her powers to make sure Whitey was at this particular group therapy. "Ace," said a serious Thatch, "I am going to gain your trust again." "Huh?" questioned Ace. "You've never lost my trust." "Demo, I did," said Thatch. "We all did," said Haruta, "because the fact remains that we had wronged you all these years and now realize that we did hurt you, emotionally." "So," said Jozu, "we are going to gain your trust back by helping you out." "Helping how?" questioned Saber. "Helping by being your allies instead," said Blenheim. "We all agreed," said Marco, "that if something bad happens, you have the Whitebeards as your allies to fight alongside you." "And the subsidiaries," chimed in Whitey. "You guys," said Ace. Sailor Mercury narrowed her eyes at the conviction. She didn't know if something was going to happen to the kingdom, to the island, but she knew that she didn't have to worry too much. After all, the Senshi were always ready to defend the kingdom. Luffy having his fleet and being a powerful pirate that was almost close to being the new king of the pirates was just an added bonus in keeping the kingdom safe, especially keeping her Heim safe. Yet, now, well, this progressed well, piped up Mercury as she stood up from where she sat after being checked for injuries by Ace and Deuce. "Now, Ace-san." "Hi," questioned Ace. "We shall be going towards more one-on-one therapy sessions about these revelations," said Mercury, "especially your self-worth as the Spade Pirates captain." "Saying you failed, silly Purinsu. Don't call me that," said an embarrassed Ace. "Also," said Mercury, who ignored what Ace said, "we will be having our final group therapy session to see how the progressed relationship between the Spade Pirates and the Whitebeard Pirates is going. It will probably be after the trials that Luffy-sama and Mamoru-sama are undergoing." "That guy," muttered Ace darkly. Without pause, Sailor Mercury bowed to the group of pirates before going to the Senshi meeting about keeping the peace within the kingdom. All of the pirates watched her go before looking at one another awkwardly. Even though Sailor Mercury was good at bringing out their raw emotions, it just left them now with awkward tension. Ace didn't know what he wanted, but he did want his siblings with him. These emotions were so not helping his reputation as a former Spades captain and a former Whitebeard commander. Just why did his mother figure send him to therapy? With a mental pout in remembering that it was his PTSD's fault, Ace tuned back to what was happening. So, what did Garp tell you about the reincarnated Oji? Questioned Izo. Oji? Questioned Whitey. Nothing for you to know about just yet, Yoi, said Marco. Anyways, go back to your quarters. You aren't even supposed to be here, Whitey. Fine, mocked Whitey, I know when I am not wanted. With a huff, Whitey left, arms crossed as if she was upset. She knew that Marco was the new Whitebeard captain. So, in default, she had to listen to him, especially when she was still a part of the Whitebeard pirates. The Whitebeard commanders watched as Whitey left before their eyes turned serious. As one, the Whitebeards and the Spades looked at Ace. They were going to get answers out of him about the dark tone Ace used. He never used it after accepting to being a Whitebeard pirate. The last time, however, was when he took off to fight Teach. Start talking, Ace, said Deuce. Yeah, agreed everyone there. Well, Gramps said. Chapter 29, First Trial, The Engagement Ring. Thank you all for gathering for this entertaining event, Mina. Everyone, said Queen Serenity. It was now time for the 3 trials that Mamoru and Luffy would be undergoing. To make it fair, the event was showcased to the wedding guests and her island inhabitants. Each person would be voting via a special card that Mercury, Pluto, and she made for this occasion. Also, the cards would know who helped the people in this event and who didn't. It wouldn't be fair for the people helping the contestants to vote for their own favorite person, now is it? Saint Jalmik was not happy to hear about that rule. The other wedding guests decided that some will help their favorite pirate while the others stayed out of it just so that they can vote for said favorite pirate. They all, however, didn't know that those special cards could also detect false voting. With that in thought, Queen Serenity IV looked around to see everyone gathered at the plaza of her home island. She was surprised Luffy had a lot of people attending the wedding and felt sympathetic to her only Masumi for the headaches Luffy created. The cheers of the people brought her back to the present, however. For this event, there will be 3 trials the competitors will go through, explained Queen Serenity. Today is the first trial. The competitors have a week to find the perfect birthday gift for my daughter. They may have help to those close to them, but those that help will not get to vote on which present was the best. Those that do vote, please choose wisely and with unbiased. A birthday gift? Questioned Nami in the crowd. I thought the Haim's birthday passed, questioned a confused koala. Answered Sabo, we all came a couple of months early to celebrate Imoto's birthday. We were just wrapped up in other things, especially with this new Oji in the mix. Luffy wanted to celebrate her birthday before marrying her, said Robin with a knowing look. Of course, said Sabo with a grin, it's been a long time since he could celebrate with her face to face. Does Luffy even have a present for her? Questioned Frankie. Sabo shrugged his shoulders. He would have been up there with Ace in protecting his precious Imoto, but he thought better to inform the Strafuts and his revolutionary partners if they had any questions. Sabo also knew that Ace would protect her just as fiercely as he would protect Luffy if something did happen. He just hoped that the Marines had more sense to start something, especially with magical girls with powers that don't get affected by seawater running around. Sabo could also see that Luffy looked ready to panic when their mother figure told them all what the first trial would be. And, said Queen Serenity, let the trial begin. Come on, said Sabo just after a gong sound filled the air, let's see who can help Lu. He looks ready to combust. Don't tell me, groaned out Nami, he doesn't have a gift at all. Alright, said Sabo who smiled innocently, I won't tell you. Inside a room. Ah, screamed out Luffy, I forgot to get USA a gift. Baka, shouted Nami fiercely. It took a while for all of them to regroup together. Ace, however, was not one of the people in this meeting, but he had 2 of his spade pirates in attendance. Apparently, Ace needed to accompany Serenity to a boy's worst nightmare imaginable, shopping. Don't get Ace wrong. He loves protective Serenity, but once Serenity goes somewhere for a shopping trip, Ace would rather be back at MT. Kalubo and hunting those giant animals in the forest. Sabo did not pity his older brother as he looked around the room to see who was there. Of course, half of the Strafut crew was there, along with Deuce and Banshee. Izo and Thatch were there as well to represent the Whitebeard pirates. There was no one, besides Sabo, to represent the revolutionaries. Sabo did, however, smile and sweat dropped when he heard Luffy exclaimed about a gift. Oh, Lu, muttered Sabo who face-palmed. Well, said Thatch, you, at least, remembered to send something to her on her other birthdays, right? Of course, said Luffy who looked to the side. Liar, coughed out Usopp. So, what did you give her last birthday, Captain? Questioned Sanji. Oh, said Luffy with a big grin, I got her that cool-looking thing from that one island a while back. Which island, Shusho? Questioned Robin. I think it was that island right after we went to that other island and fought Mingo, said Luffy. The Strafuts just nodded their heads. They didn't know how Luffy sent the present or which island he was referring to, but if he said he sent something, then he did. They just had to ask Serenity about said present is all. Sabo just sighed in his hands. Even he could comprehend what Luffy said, and he wasn't there at the time. The others, however, not so much due to not knowing Luffy besides the stories they heard from Ace. Yet, when they saw how relaxed the Strafuts who were with them and Sabo were, they just shrugged and nodded also. Okay, said Izo, you have gotten a present to her every birthday, yet did you actually give her like a ring or something to signify your engagement? Huh, questioned Luffy. What Izo is asking, said Thatch, is if you actually proposed to your girl right before you set sail. Why would I do that? Questioned Luffy, we're already engaged. Oh, Lou, groaned out Sabo. What? Questioned a confused Luffy. Don't tell me that you never once realized that Serenity would have loved a ring to signify your marriage, said Sabo, and not just something made when you were kids. We don't need a ring, questioned a confused Luffy. The Strafuts, Deuce, Banshee, Izo, and Thatch looked at Luffy in horror. They all knew that a girl that is probably engaged to you since young and fell in love for a few years deserve an actual engagement ring. It was just common sense to make that girl feel special. Luffy, on the other hand, was just really confused about everything else. He didn't get what everyone was trying to tell him. A ring. He doesn't even know if Serenity wore jewelry. Usually, he would find a very cute plush or something he thought Serenity would like from a different island and send it as gifts to her. But, jewelry was always off the table, especially when he knew that his navigator would have his head if he spent more money than he was allowed to hold. His crew didn't even know that whatever money Nami gave him during island exploring was towards finding a gift for Serenity before whatever left was for eating meat. Luffy, said Deuce, have you ever thought about giving her an engagement ring? Well, said Luffy with a shuffle of feet. You actually did, said a surprised Sanji. Well, yeah, said Luffy, I don't usually go off to eat meat and stuff when we stop at an island, you know. I try to find one, but I know whatever money Nami gives out, it's not really enough for a ring. So, it's my fault, questioned Nami with anger in her eyes. You have to admit that you hoard all that money for yourself, Nami, said a cowering Usopp. Demo, said Nami, if Luffy just told me what it was for, I would have. Really? Questioned a skeptical Robin. Nami-san, from what I have seen, you love money just as much as your tangerine trees. You just give enough to make sure we also have enough to eat and live in the wide open seas, despite give out these debts after our crewmen use the money. Nami sheepishly looked away after what Robin said. So, she had a bad habit from when she was with Arlong. At least, she knows that if they have money, they can afford the other things they really need. Nami, however, also stands by what she said. If Luffy just told her why he wanted to buy a ring, she would have actually went with him just so that Luffy would get a ring at a huge discount. Robin smiled innocently as she pointed out one of Nami's flaws with money. Sure, she shouldn't have, but it was fun getting a reaction out of any of her crew members, especially Usopp's. Usopp would always have the best reactions. Still, said Nami. Gomen, said Luffy, I should have probably told you all about USA. Hi, said Sanji, you should have, but that's over with. We should really be focused on what you will give to your fiancé. And that is a ring, said Banshee, an engagement ring that Robin, Nami, and I will help you find. Does this mean the rest of us will be fine to vote? Questioned Thatch, since we aren't really helping with finding said ring. I'll go ask Kassan, sighed Sabo. A week later. Ladies and gentlemen, said Queen Serenity. The week was finally over as the competition heated up. No one knew what Mamoru had gotten for Serenity, but they also didn't know what Luffy had gotten her. Ace, on his part, was doing his individual therapy sessions while also staying with Serenity to protect her better during these trials. Sabo really wanted to also be a guard for his Imoto, yet he also knew that no one knew who He was, besides those within the castle. He would have been viewed suspicious if he was near Serenity while the kingdom didn't realize he was alive and back. Now, he, along with everyone else, was back at the plaza with Mamoru and Luffy standing on one side and Serenity and Ace standing on the other side. First, said Queen Serenity, Mamoru-san, the reincarnated Earth Oji will give my Masumi her gift. Coughed out Mamoru as he approached, I have thought long and hard for this gift. He's got a speech, questioned Haruta quietly. Quiet, yoi, hissed out Marco. As I have remembered, Princess Serenity V loves flowers, said Mamoru, so, I have ventured into the gardens of Elysian to present this to you. Where is Alishan? Questioned a quiet chopper. I am not sure, whispered back Robin, yet, I believe it is a place that is only familiar to the Silver Millennium. You can see the other people, including those hidden Senshi, have surprised looks on their faces. Just as Robin informed them, Luffy's allies saw that the sailor Senshi and the people of the Silver Moon Kingdom Island looked at Mamoru in surprise. They slightly remembered Alishan and the guardian of said place. As everyone looked on, Mamoru produced a silver-white hibiscus from behind and handed over to Serenity. Serenity, on her part, looked startled at seeing a white hibiscus, Ace as well. Ace knew that hibiscuses were his birth mother's favorite flower, and seeing one that was white, it threw him for a loop. Mamoru, however, smiled before bowing towards Serenity and going back to where he stood. He watched, with a sweat drop, on how Luffy was bouncing towards Serenity. Yusa-chan, said Luffy with a big smile. Luffy, said Serenity with a smile of her own. That's such a pretty flower, said Luffy before giving a thumbs up at Mamoru. Nice find, mackerel. It's Mamoru, sighed Mamoru. Anyways, said Luffy, I have 2 presents to give USA-chan. 2, muttered Banshee, I thought Luffy was going to present 1 gift. Same here, muttered Nami with a tick over her head. Well, that is our shusho, giggled Robin. As Banshee, Nami, and Robin conversed with each other, the males that were with Luffy looked on in confusion. They thought the girls and Luffy were only getting an engagement ring. So, what's this about having a second gift? Everyone that knew the situation with Luffy looked on nervously. It wasn't long that Luffy's arm stretched out and grabbed onto Sabo's shirt tightly before pulling Sabo up towards the stage. Everyone, including Queen Serenity IV, looked on in surprise as Sabo was smashed face first onto the stage and in front of Serenity. The first gift is Sabo, exclaimed Luffy with a huge grin. Sabo, questioned a citizen in the crowd. He's alive, questioned another. Luffy, growled Sabo, I am not a gift. Of course, you are, said Luffy, now, everyone also knows that you are alive. You can finally protect USA like you always wanted to with Ace. What a nice gift, teased Serenity as she hugged Sabo close to her. Demo, what is the other gift? As Serenity asked about the second gift, Sabo scrambled up and stood next to Ace, who was in Senshi Knight form. Ace, on his part, was laughing loudly while the crowd was speculating the miracle that Sabo was alive. He never knew that Luffy would have done that, but he was also glad. It was one less headache for their mother figure to figure out how to inform the Silver Moon Kingdom Island's citizen of the miracle. It was also nice that Serenity didn't let Luffy explain just how Sabo was alive, for he also knew that the revolutionaries were not prepared to be ousted, yet. Ace tuned back in just in time for Luffy to show the next gift. I may not have gotten this in some X-code tick place, said Luffy. Demo, this was in and of itself an adventure. Especially with the scary females. Luffy, growled Nami. You are most definitely not scary, Nami Swan, sang out Sanji. Shut up, Arrow Cook, said Zoro, I'm trying to listen to our captain. Shut up, hissed Izo, the both of you. I am trying to hear. Same here, muttered Blenheim. So, with that, said Luffy before getting on one knee in front of Serenity and pulling something out. I know it's very late to do this, and I know I should have done this before setting sail. I also found out how just very late I was to doing this from Sabo Ni. Just get on with it, Lu, shouted the brothers. Right, said Luffy, who then turned serious. Serenity, for the first time I saw you as a kid, I just knew you were the one, you know. I know that I'm pushy and selfish, but I'm a pirate. I already knew that I wanted you and that I love you very much. You made me very, very happy in agreeing to be engaged with me. Yet, it would make me very, very happy if you will accept this very late ring for our engagement until the day we marry. With that, Luffy opened up the small something from his hand towards Serenity. Everyone, including Serenity herself, gasped at what the small thing was. It was a ring. Yet, it wasn't just an ordinary ring. Oh no. This ring looked custom made as it had Luffy's signature straw hat, but in diamond form. It also had little jewels that matched Serenity's eye color surrounding it, making it look like little waves. When Luffy took the ring out, he showed what was inside, and it was a little message that read, Luffy, said a teary Serenity. So, will you wear it, questioned Luffy, will you accept being my precious treasure from now until after? Hi, said Serenity. Yata, yelled out Luffy as he quickly placed the ring on. As the ring was on Serenity's finger, Luffy couldn't help himself as he grabbed Serenity and spun her around. He still didn't understand why he needed to have a ring on Serenity's finger, but he loved seeing how happy it made his Serenity for having it. He also didn't hear the announcement that Queen Serenity IV told to the citizens, but he did notice his brothers coming towards them. Now, we just have to wait for the citizens to vote, said Ace. Yeah, said Sabo, demo, for now. Now, questioned Ace. Now, said Sabo before glaring at Luffy, Lou, what's this about me being a gift? Well, said Luffy with a sweat drop, you always complained how Ace could show his face around Serenity, demo you couldn't because of how no one realized you were alive, besides Motoki-kun. So, I thought that you being alive as a gift would be better. Warn me next time, said Sabo with a glare. Oh okay, said Luffy with a nervous laugh. And, said Sabo before. Itai, shouted Luffy, what was that for? That's for manhandling me, said Sabo with a feral grin, don't do it again. Alright, said Luffy. Chapter 30, Second Trial, Not So Great Decision Making. The citizens have spoken, stated Queen Serenity, the winner of the first trial is Monkey D. Luffy. It has been a week since the first trial ended. It took a while for the Senshi to fairly count the votes on who won the first trial. In the end, it was Luffy's engagement ring to Serenity that beat Mamoru's gift. Everyone, however, could see Serenity still sporting the hibiscus flower in her hair as she hung out with her friends. Luffy, on his part, was just glad that Serenity was happy with a funny flower in her hair. Mamoru was also secretly meeting up with Luffy and Serenity in the gardens and hanging out while the Senshi counted the votes. Now, the votes were all accountable, and Luffy was the one who won. It was time for the second trial. We are now on to the second trial, said Queen Serenity. I feel like Luffy is not going to win this one, said Robin. Why would you say that? Questioned Koala. Just a feeling I have, said Robin. I bet it's something that we wouldn't even begin to know how to help too, muttered Nami. Quiet down over there, muttered out one of the Whitebeard commanders. Nami just glowered at said Whitebeard commander. She was just worried about her captain, and knowing that this trial may be the one thing that she, along with her nakama, can't help with, it just irks her that she can't help the one person who helped free her. Robin placed a hand on Nami's shoulder, knowing what she was thinking. She, too, worried about not helping the one person who helped save her. Nami gave a grimaced smile at Robin before both of them tuned back to what Queen Serenity IV was saying. Robin did curse herself on how right this next trial was going to be a failure, on her captain's part, that is. As you well know, said Queen Serenity, a king is not only a companion to a queen, but he also helps the queen makes those hard decisions that can also make alliances with other kingdoms. With this second trial, we will witness how Luffy and Mamoru makes these decisions to help better the kingdom they will one day rule. Kuso, Japanese curse word, said Zoro vehemently. You said it, muttered Sanji. In a waiting room. Ah, yelled out Sabo, this is a disaster. Sabo was the most freaked out about the second trial. He just knew that Luffy will mess this trial up with how Luffy acts. He can finally remember how impulsive Luffy could be. Though, he blames those on Garp. Garp was impulsive as well. Sabo looked at Ace who had a pensive face on. Ace knew what Sabo knew about Luffy, and he knew that this trial will not end well. He was also willing to bet that Luffy would somehow make certain kingdoms be angry at him for how he acts. He doesn't even act like a king does, powerful and stuffy, but with hints of kindness. Yet, Luffy has the kindness in spades. It's the powerful and stuffy part that Luffy doesn't have. Luffy also didn't have the patience for listening to other people. Should we sick Makino on Luffy before this trial? Questioned Ace. Who's Makino? Questioned the others. You've met her, briefly, said Sabo, she's the woman with green hair and kind eyes. She's also the woman who watched over Luffy while he lived in Fuchsia, said Ace. So, how come Luffy's personality is like? Asked Frankie. Like a whirlwind, finished Sabo, well, I blame it on Garp. True, said Ace, Garp had Luffy way before we met and became brothers through sake. The Strafuts, the Whitebeard commanders, and the Spade pirates looked at Sabo and Ace in surprise. They never even knew that Sabo, Ace, and Luffy weren't blood-related brothers. They just assumed that Ace and Luffy got their coloring from their father while Sabo got his from their mother. To now knowing that Sabo, Ace, and Luffy weren't blood-related, Nami and Usopp groaned out together on how their captain never tells them anything about himself. They could see how Ace and Luffy could have been blood-related since both brothers acted the same in every way, along with how their coloring looked pretty similar. When meeting Sabo for that first time, they just assumed things about their captain. I'm pretty sure you've never told anyone of us that you weren't blood-related, Yoi, said Marco. Why does that matter anyways? Questioned Ace with glare. You guys used to be mine under Whitebeard, and we don't share blood either. Used to be? Questioned a confused Chopper. I'm thinking that we have to inform Mercury that we need another therapy session, muttered Deuce. Anyways, said Thatch who stopped an early argument, what are we going to do about Luffy's second trial? Everyone paused when they realized that they went on a tangent about what was going on. They quickly shook their heads before starting up on the problem at hand, Luffy and the second trial. They don't know how Luffy would get past the trial without failing. While they were thinking about this, 3 people in another room were meeting. The meeting, however, was more about calming one person than about anything else. Said person was flaying his arms about like a headless chicken. "Luffy," said one male, "calm down." "I can't calm down," whined Luffy, "you know how I am about decision-makings, Mamoru." "That is true," said the now identified Mamoru. "Meanie," pouted Luffy before turning to the last person, Usagi. "Tell Mamoru not to be a meanie." "You heard Lu, Mamo," giggled Serenity, "don't be mean." Mamoru sighed as he heard the two jokingly berated him for being a so-called meanie. He, however, also didn't take the berating to heart. He knew that his friends were just joking with him so that Luffy could finally calm down from what Queen Serenity IV announced. Both Serenity and Mamoru knew that Luffy had a habit of being selfish and deciding things that end up in, what he would always call it, an adventure. The two were just happy that Luffy finally calmed down so that they would talk to one another. "Anyways, Lu," said Mamoru, "it's alright to fail this test. That would just make you try your hardest in the last trial. It would also make us tie for USA's hand in marriage though," pouted Luffy, "I don't want it to be a tie." "Do you want to practice your answers?" questioned Mamoru, "I can probably coach you on what to say." "Would that be allowed?" questioned Serenity, "especially since everyone doesn't even know that we 3 are friends." "True," said Mamoru. "Why can't we just tell them that you are our friend and were invited to the wedding?" questioned Luffy. "Probably because my so-called dad would call on a buster call," said Mamoru. All 3 shivered as Mamoru said that statement. It was true that most nobles, especially celestial dragons, would call on a buster call, yet Mamoru also knew that his father wanted power that only he could get if Mamoru marries Princess Serenity V. However, Mamoru also knew that he wouldn't even think about marrying Princess Serenity V. He was sure that, in the past, he would have because the two were so in love in the past, yet this wasn't the past. This was the present. Mamoru was sure that Princess Serenity V loves Monkey D. Luffy with all of her heart, and who was he to stand in front of this love? Luffy, on the other hand, started to hug Serenity to his person. He could still remember how close his nakama and he almost died when that buster call destroyed Eni's lobby. Though she never had experience with this so-called buster call, Serenity heard stories from Mamoru over the years about that particular event. "Let's hope it never comes down to it," said Serenity. "Yet, if it does happen," said Mamoru, "I'll help any way I can, even using the golden crystal to help." "Doesn't that drain yourself though?" asked a worried Serenity. "Better using my energy than you draining yours," bit back Mamoru. Exclaimed Luffy, "I never knew that about you two." "We try not to worry you about that," said a deadpanned Mamoru, "besides, I'm sure you'll just fight the buster call with your nakama." "Sure will," said Luffy, "I never fought back the buster call at Eni's lobby because I ran out of energy to even move. Demo I'm sure that my nakama and I can blast the buster call away from USA's home." "Let's worry about that later," said Mamoru. Why?" questioned Luffy who had forgotten just why he was panicking beforehand until. "You have to learn about decision-making to pass the second trial," said Mamoru, "did you forget already?" "Ah, I forgot," said Luffy before, Mamo. Yusa. Help me." With that, Mamoru and Serenity sighed in exasperation before sharing a bemused grin between the two. The two aforementioned teens were just glad that they stayed friends, even after all the trouble Mamoru brought upon Serenity's door. Though, for now, the two had to calm Luffy once more before trying to educate him on how to make decisions during the second trial. The day of the second trial. "Oh, Luffy," groaned out Nami. It was finally the day of the second trial. Everyone was gathered at the stage where there was a big screen showing. Said screen had the images of Mamoru and Luffy standing in front of what appears to be several individuals. Luffy, on his part, was fidgeting when he saw who was in front of him. Mamoru, with his past memories, could tell that these were royals from different planets, especially one King Demand of Nemesis. Mamoru winced when he concluded that because Luffy was not going to be winning this trial. When Queen Serenity IV introduced who were going to judge Mamoru and Luffy's responses, every person who knew Luffy winced. "This is going to be a massacre," whined Sabo into Ace's arms. "Lu doesn't stand a chance," winced Ace, "though, I am surprised to see Demand there." "Why?" questioned Koala, "what's wrong with him?" "Oh," said Ace, "he's another admirer that wants Sarah's hand in marriage." Shouted everyone, including Sabo. Ace sighed before launching into who Demand was. Apparently, everyone got the gist of Demand being jealous of Luffy, especially when he was denied the hand that he wanted as his queen. Ace, however, told them about how Demand was scared of Ace and how well he could command the flames he uses to protect Serenity. Ace also enjoyed scaring Demand with his death glare while Demand was on the island for an alliance talk with Queen Serenity IV and Princess Serenity V. Nami was the one who asked why Serenity was with that alliance talk in the first place, and Ace said that it was for Serenity to learn the ropes on how to make alliances and not anger another planet. As they talked about who Demand was and who else Serenity had as admirers during the years Ace was being a protector, mostly everyone forgot the second trial until, and the second trial is complete, called out Queen Serenity IV. "We missed it," exclaimed a horrified Nami. "Well, to be fair," said Frankie, "I don't think any one of us would want to witness Luffy's answers to whatever questions those royals threw at him." "True," said Sanji, who was smoking a cigarette, "I rather not know what Luffy had in mind when answering royalty." "Oh no," mumbled Chopper, "poor Luffy if he loses." The Strafuts were quick to be quieted down by a fellow ally as Queen Serenity IV continued to address the crowd. They all, however, were surprised when Queen Serenity IV said that the second trial was a close call between Mamoru and Luffy. They were more in shock that when Queen Serenity IV announced that Mamoru won by just 3 points ahead of Luffy, everyone was wondering what answers they had missed from Luffy's mouth. However, they could tell from the screen that Luffy looked a bit sad at losing before they promptly face-palmed when they heard what Luffy said next. "Ah!" shouted Luffy as he dramatically hugged Serenity, Gomen, USA, for failing the trial. "You tried your best, Lou," said Serenity with amusement, "I'm not mad." "Honto?" questioned Luffy. "Hi," said Serenity with a smile. Coughed out Queen Serenity, who was looking at the screen, "if you two are done." "Gomen," said the couple as they kind of looked chastised when they heard Queen Serenity from wherever the second trial was held. "As I was saying," said Queen Serenity, "Mamoru has shown exemplary kingship decisions, thus making his points much higher. Luffy, on the other hand, has some wonderful decisions, yet some were not quite what the royals were looking for. And we missed it," groaned out Sabo. "Thus, making this competition a tie," said Queen Serenity. "However, the last trial will be announced after a few days' break. So, please enjoy the break before the finals." Chapter 31, The Secret Friendship Exposed. "I can't believe those two are tied," said a disbelief Nami. "Well, you know Shusho," giggled Robin. "It was a day after the second trial. As promised, everyone in the island took a break. It didn't, however, stop the Strafuts, the Whitebeard commanders, the Spade Pirates, Vivi, Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Koala, Hotaru, Sabo, and Ace to get together to talk about what was going on. They were all still stressed about the trials. Though, all of the girls congratulated those that thought of the engagement ring for the first trial. When they were talking about the second trial, all of them looked a bit grim. Sure, Luffy wasn't the brightest when making decisions, but he wasn't really an idiot. They could all attest to that when the Queen herself told them all that it was a close call on who was the winner. "How are we going to be helping Luffy now?" questioned Chopper. "What do you mean?" questioned Izo. "I mean," said Chopper, "we don't even know what the last trial will be." "The reindeer is right," said Namor before addressing Ace and Sabo. "Do you two know what the last trial will be?" Pouted Ace and Sabo. "Queen Serenity didn't disclose the last trial to us," said Sabo. "I believe she wants this to be a fair trial," pointed out Hotaru. "Doesn't mean we have to like it," scowled out Ace. "Though," said a thoughtful Vivi, "in every kingdom, there is an army to command by the king." Agreed Rebecca, "I believe that maybe the last trial will be something dealing with combat." Shirahoshi nodded her head in agreement to her fellow princesses. She remembered her brothers had to do the same with their own army back on Fishman Island. The others around the princesses paused on what the three told them as they contemplated on what said princesses said. It was true that every kingdom has a person in charge of the army, and everyone knew that the person who was in charge of said army would be the king. Yet, everyone turned to the Strafuts, Ace, and Sabo as they all moaned out in despair when they heard this declaration. "What?" questioned Thatch, "what's wrong?" "What the princesses said," groaned out Ace. "Luffy is doomed," sighed out Usopp. "What do you mean?" questioned Vivi. "You remember how Luffy never plans things," Vivi, pointed out Nami. "I'm sure he has changed," questioned Vivi. "Yeah, said Sanji, "that baka of a captain of ours hasn't changed a bit. He still charges forward without a plan. And if he still charges without thinking," said Chopper. "What makes you think that he can command an army?" finished Frankie. Ace and Sabo bemoaned on how Luffy as a child was like that as well. They would also mutter something about fishing out Luffy from animals' stomachs. Hearing those mutterings from the two older brothers made everyone blanched. They blanched harder when they heard mutters from Chopper, Nami, and Usopp about their adventures and battles. Yet, this was Luffy. He's the only one crazy enough to charge into battle without a plan. Those around the brothers and the Strafuts looked at each other before sighing deeply. I guess we could knock some sense into him before the trial, said a questioning Atmos. Yeah, that's not going to work, said Hotaru. I agree, said Sabo, if Ace and I couldn't knock some sense into him, if his crew couldn't do that when they were sailing around the New World, what makes you think you guys can? They have a point, Yoi, said Marco. So, that's it, questioned Rebecca, we are going to let Lucy lose to this reincarnated OG. We're going to let him lose the love of his life. Lucy, muttered Usopp questioningly with Chopper shrugging in confusion. We aren't giving up, said Zoro, we just have to think of another plan. That's better said than done, Moss Head, said Sanji. What was that, growled Zoro. Don't start, said Nami with anger in her tone, we don't have time for you two to argue again. As the others stopped their conversation to see Nami taming Zoro and Sanji from fighting again, Brook was the one who spotted someone hiding while moving towards a destination. If he had eyes, Brook would have blinked at the weird scene he was witnessing, yet he did not. Brook, instead, tilted his skull to the side in confusion, garnishing everyone to turn to him in confusion. Chopper was the one who asked Brook what was wrong, leading to Brook raising one skeletal finger and pointing at the figure in the distance. Everyone blinked before following the sight of where Brook was pointing at, leaving two brothers to growl. Why is that guy skulking around, growled out Sabo. Well, he is a guest at this castle, said Shirahoshi. But to skulk, questioned Koala, I am with Sabo. Something fishy is going on. We should follow him, said Atmos. Agreed everyone except. I believe I am coming down with I can't follow this fellow or I'll die disease, said Usopp with a hint of fear in his eyes. Come on, you big baby, said Nami, it's just Mamoru. Yeah, said Usopp, D-Demo, he is a celestial dragon. He can call up marines if we are caught. Not on this island, said Ace, we've been over this. For this island, we need a special invitation. No invitation, no entry. Usopp wasn't convinced at all, but that didn't stop Nami from forcefully dragging him along with the group. They trailed after the now discovered Mamoru at a distance. They could see him dodging the guards and a wayward Senshi as he made his way towards an unrecalled hallway. They saw him look around him, letting them dodge behind some big, round columns to hide better, which was saying something due to the size of their group. When Mamoru was sure that he wasn't being followed, the entire group saw him going into said hallway. Being curious pirates, revolutionaries, and princesses, the large group followed Mamoru before peering into the hallway to see him knocking on a door. The group was very much surprised when a familiar person opened said door. Oh, it's just you, said the familiar person. Who would you think I was? Asked an incredulous Mamoru. The person bringing me food, said the person. Luffy, groaned out Mamoru, why would you think I was bringing food when I just called you and Serenity to have an important meeting? Food is important, said Luffy, and I'm hungry. The large group sighed inwardly as they watched Mamoru and Luffy interact with one another in kindness. They would have thought Luffy would be angry at Mamoru for trying to steal Serenity away from him. That thought, of course, was kicked out of their heads as Serenity appeared right next to Luffy. They could practically see Serenity talking to Mamoru as well, Luffy's arm casually around Serenity's back. Mamoru, on his part, wasn't even foaming at the mouth or proclaiming for Luffy to get his hands off of Serenity. They all watched and listened to their conversation about Luffy and food when, why am I friends with you, sighed Mamoru. Because you like us, said Luffy with certainty. I really don't know why I do either, said Mamoru. Come on, Mamo, said Luffy, don't tell me you have forgotten how we became friends or how we kept in touch whenever my crew and I docked on the same island as you in the past. Of course not, said Mamoru, who would forget all those chaotic times we've met up. Oh good, said Luffy, I thought you had amnesia like Sabo did before he regained his memories. It's amnesia, Lou, said Serenity with a giggle. That's what I said, said Luffy. I give up, said Mamoru with a sigh. Friends, shouted multiple voices. Luffy, Serenity, and Mamoru jumped up in surprise before looking at the end of the hallway. There, the three friends spotted the large group that was just standing at the end, their jaws dropped in comical disbelief. Seeing their expressions, Luffy was the one who started to laugh while Mamoru was sweating in nervousness. No one, not even his father, knew that throughout Luffy's journey to becoming Pirate King, Mamoru would meet up with Luffy and catch up. Sometimes, he would be dragged into a wild adventure with Luffy before Luffy set sailed once more. The weirdest one was bumping into Luffy while he was at a marine base. That thrown Mamoru for a loop when he saw his friend badly impersonated a marine of all things. He still also couldn't believe that Luffy and his crew literally landed inside a marine base after Luffy's Skypiea adventure. Now, Mamoru was caught, red-handed, as a friend, a nakama, of Luffy's and Serenity's. He even almost missed Luffy's exclamation as he sweated out in nervousness. Shishishishi, laughed out Luffy, your faces are hilarious, guys. Within a room. So wait, said Deuce, you guys met at Dawn Island and have been friends ever since. That's what we said Luffy with a huff. Since the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, Luffy, Serenity, and Mamoru gestured for everyone to convene inside the room Luffy and Serenity stepped out of. Mamoru, on his part, was staying far away from everyone by sitting fidgety on a chair that was in a corner. He could see that everyone was very skeptical about everything that Luffy and Serenity explained to everyone. He could also see the distrust within Hotaru, Ace, and Sabo as they heard the story. Hotaru was muttering to herself about how that wasn't possible because she would have known about it, being with Luffy and Serenity the most while Ace and Sabo was out to sea. I feel like that's hard to believe, said a skeptical Frankie. Especially that tale about Luffy being inside a marine base and not getting caught, muttered Ace. Demo, said Serenity, it's true. I even saved the Den Den Mushi's call log. That repeated number could be someone else, said Sabo. You guys, said Luffy, you don't trust our judgment. We can't really say anything about Serenity, yet there was the time when we did the Davy back fight, said a disgruntled Nami, the second time, not the first. Foxy was hilarious though, said Luffy. Demo, not at the expense of your life when we went to Nebulandia, Shusho, said Robin gently. What? Questioned the two older brothers, Mamoru, Serenity, and Hotaru in shocked horror. They were not the only ones in horror because as the Strafuts discussed their many adventures, everyone had a horrified expression. They didn't know how Luffy could have so many close calls and dying, but they knew that the Strafuts weren't exaggerating. It took a while for everyone to finally know most of the Strafuts' adventures. After hearing their adventures, everyone weren't that surprised for Ace and Sabo to smack Luffy in the back of his head, hard. Itai, yelped out Luffy, what was that for? Don't you ever think before acting, yelled the two brothers. Why do you always try to get yourself killed, grinded out Ace. It wouldn't be as fun if I planned things, said Luffy, it wouldn't be an adventure. Luffy, groaned out Sabo, you plan things so that you and your crew doesn't get injured. Especially with the stunts you always pull, said Ace. You worry us too much, Ototo, said Ace and Sabo together. Same here, said Hotaru, Serenity, and Mamoru together. Luffy winced as he apologized while everyone looked at the group chastising Luffy for whatever he was thinking. At least, he was apologetic in giving his found family heart attacks. Even the Strafuts were surprised to see Luffy being apologetic because usually he would say it, but it would still result in him getting them into interesting, yet dangerous adventures. Maybe Luffy will stop with the dangerous adventures. However, who were they kidding? It wouldn't be Luffy without the chaotic and dangerously interesting adventures. Anyways, said Skull, why didn't you tell us that you three were friends? Would you have believed us, questioned Serenity, because just now, it was proven correctly that you didn't. Demo, said Sabo with an accusing tone of voice, Gramps heard that this guy was only marrying you to gain your powers. I was acting, exclaimed Mamoru, you try to make sure your father doesn't find out about your friendship to protect the island from a buster call, muttering to himself not that that did any good. Questioned Koala, what was that? What? Questioned Mamoru, what was what? What you just said, said Koala. Said Mamoru hesitantly. So, you do have a secret, said Ace accusingly with a flame fist held up, spill it. Or you get barbecued. Well, said Mamoru, I was going to inform Lou and Sarah about this. Don't call them those nicknames, grounded out Sabo. Demo, since everyone knows our friendship now, said Mamoru who ignored Sabo, I guess this secret meeting is not so secret now. Why were you meeting them, questioned a suspicious Namor. I was going to tell them that father, said Mamoru who spat out father, is calling for the Marines to come and take out the pirates and the innocents with a buster call due to the fact that Lou and I tied for Sarah's hand in marriage. Nani, shouted everyone. Chapter 32, Mamoru's warning, the buster call. Buster call, questioned an incredulous Nami, here. You better start explaining, Mamoru, growled out Hotaru. As Mamoru dropped the bomb about his father calling on a buster call towards Silver Moon Kingdom Island, everyone was exclaiming so many things at once. They couldn't believe that the father would call on it when he was still on the island as well. Luffy wrapped his arms around Serenity as Serenity bit her lower lip in worry. The couple knew that there was a certain possibility that the terrible, horrible, no good situation would occur, but this soon. The couple could only stare at Mamoru as he slightly nodded his head. Mamoru was actually looking forward for Luffy and Serenity's marriage, but just why did he need to remember his past? He still thought about the fates testing Luffy's strength by him remembering and accidentally blurting out he remembered his past life to his father. Mamoru flinched as Hotaru growled towards him to explain. Well, started Mamoru. Flashback. How could you let that barbarian, tie with you, growled out Jalmik. Mamoru winced at his father's angry rant. He could tell that Luffy was giving it his all because he knows Luffy. They are friends, and Luffy tying with him was a miracle. He inwardly praised Luffy for the engagement ring all the while trying to not laugh out loud at Sabo being flung at the stage. Mamoru was also impressed by how Luffy could come up with some good decisions because he knows Luffy. He also knows that Luffy doesn't think that well, but when push comes to shove, Luffy could always be dependable. He just wished that his father would not go on to a rant about being better than everyone on this island. Monkey-san is a formidable opponent, Tosen, said Mamoru. He shouldn't have to be, said Jalmik with a scowl, we are the elite. We are above their standards. Yeah right, thought Mamoru as he nodded his head slightly. Akainu, barked out Jalmik, what can we do to make sure that Mamoru becomes king of the solar system? We could always let me deal with Dragon's son personally, said Akainu. Too messy, said Jalmik. Not to mention that your magma powers are a dead giveaway to the queen on who murdered Monkey-san, said a deadpanned Mamoru. Jalmik nodded his head in agreement with Mamoru. No matter how devil fruit powers are diverse in the entire Grand Line in the Four Blues, but there will always be one person per devil fruit powers. Everyone here also knows who has the magma devil fruit powers, so murdering the stupid upstart that was Monkey D. Luffy was a no-go. They couldn't let this kingdom know that that pirate was murdered before they could obtain the powers of the solar system. Jalmik was almost drooling when he thought about the powers again. Yet, his Masuko was losing said powers to a barbarian. Well, we could always kidnap the Heim, said a thoughtful Jalmik. We aren't pirates, Tosen, said Mamoru. Ah, but we are the entitled, said Jalmik, we get to have anything our hearts desire. The Heim will be ours no matter what. Might I also suggest a buster call to this place, said Akainu, it seems as though these people will try to retrieve the Heim before Mamoru can marry her instead. Yet, with the buster call, they would be completely wiped out, said Jalmik who clapped his hands happily. Demo, Tosen, started Mamoru before he was cut off. I shall arrange everything, sir, said Akainu. Hi, said Jalmik who waved his hand nonchalantly, set everything up. Turns to Mamoru and glares Demo, if you really want to make sure these people live, you win that last round, Musuko. Hi, said a resigned Mamoru. End flashback. That despicable, started an angry Vivi. Mamoru could feel the tension in the room as he looked over at the enraged faces. He winced when he saw Ace and Sabo's dark look while sweat dropping when he got to Luffy hugging Serenity's breathe away. He literally took a step back from Hotaru who was glowing a very violent violet color. Hotaru was showing a menacing glare as she thought about Jalmik and everything terrible he did. She couldn't fathom just how far some people would do for status and power. Serenity gently pushed Luffy to wrap his arms loosely around her. She knew that something was wrong when Mamoru called on the Den Den Mushi for a meeting between Luffy, Mamoru, and her. She was just now glad that the others knew about their friendship to help them make sure the Silver Moon Kingdom Island withstood against this buster call. So, what are we going to do? Questioned Izo. Nodded Blenheim, should we inform the queen? We have to, said Hotaru. Do we really? Questioned Nami. Hi, said Hotaru, what Mamoru revealed is a national red alert for our citizens to know to be prepared to evacuate. Red alert, said Ace with a bemused look, I guess you could call that, but I know that the citizens are also going to be trying to fight the Marines instead of fleeing. True, sighed Serenity, they love this island as much as we do. They would want to stay and protect their homes. Hotaru and Ace nodded in agreement with what Serenity said while the pirates looked at them in surprise. They knew that the queen was very good at what she did, but to garner a lot of loyalty from every citizen that lived on the island that equals to another army to fight. That was some power this queen had. They all stared at Serenity who was the replica of the queen's kind and gentle personality before nodding mentally that, yes. The citizens are very loyal to fight for their home and their queen. Vivi, Rebecca, and Shirahoshi thought back to their own kingdoms and their people who more or less fought against the tyranny of some people. They could really relate to what Serenity said about the citizens wanting to fight for their home's freedom. So, what can we do? Questioned Frankie. Like Hotaru said Sabo, we have to tell Queen Serenity so the citizens will know what is happening. Forewarned is better than being annihilated. Gomen for all of the troubles, said Mamoru with a sad look. No one blames you, said Rebecca gently. Speak for yourself, muttered Zoro with narrowed eyes. Zoro knew that he shouldn't blame everything on this Mamoru guy, but he couldn't help it. Ever since coming to the island and being surprised by his captain getting married, he was getting turned around with a lot of news. Now, the most disturbing one comes up, and he couldn't even fight anything because the island has a no-fighting policy during this entire debacle. He was itching for a fight, though. Yet, he respects his captain too much to just do that until the stupid Marines make the first move. Then, it will be a good way to get his aggressions out. He could tell that Sanji was the same, even if he flirted with every senshi they came across in this big castle. So, we are in agreement, said Vivi. Hi, said Serenity, time to tell Mama about our friendship and the Buster Call. So much for keeping this under wraps, sighed Luffy. That's rich coming from you, growled out Nami with a glare. What does that mean? Questioned a confused Luffy. Let's just say, Sencho, said Robin, that you tend to rush into a lot of things instead of sticking to the plan. I stick to plans, said Luffy with a pout. Traffy's plan in Dressrosa, said a deadpan Frankie. Laying low when finding Sanji in Big Mom's territory, said a deadpan Nami. Laying low while we were resupply the ship in Nanohana, said a deadpan Usopp. That one, said Luffy, I didn't know Smokey was there. You led the Marines towards us, yelled out the Strafuts who were there at the time, and that was the time you ran away from us when Nami, I said to stick together. Even though they were planning to tell Queen Serenity IV about the friendship and about the danger, the rest of the pirates couldn't help but laugh when Luffy crossed his arms and pouted. It wasn't his fault he was hungry and smelled the delicious meat. Just thinking about the delicious food in Nanohana made him drool slightly. Ace and Sabo saw this and laughed louder than before. They could always count on Luffy to make everyone feel joy and smiles again after a serious discussion. Later that day, a Buster Call, yelled out Garb. That's what Tosen and Akainu said Mamoru, who spat out the words Tosen and Akainu in the same statement. After laughing at Luffy and the Strafuts' expenses, the entire group made it into the throne room to speak to Queen Serenity IV. They all had to dodge Jalmik and Akainu when they spotted them walking around the courtyard. Though, Marco had the wonderful idea for some of them to tail Jalmik and Akainu, just in case. That left Ace, Sabo, Mamoru, Serenity, Luffy, the three princesses, and some of the pirates left to go to the throne room. There, they found Queen Serenity IV talking to Shanks, Ben, Yasop, Garp, Sengoku, Kobe, Helmeppo, the princesses, fathers, Dragon, Koala, and Pluto. They, however, paused when all eyes were on them when they came in, Pluto's being the only one all-knowing. It didn't take that long for Shanks to comment about Mamoru being there, letting every bit of information come out, especially the friendship between Mamoru and the engaged couple. I can't believe Anchor kept Mamoru's friendship a secret, whined Shanks. Aren't you focusing on the wrong thing? Questioned Ben with a done expression on his face. Demo, whined Shanks, it's Anchor. I can keep secrets, whined out Luffy. Not really, said Sabo, I remember when we were younger. Lou, you just blurted out that I told you about Ace's heritage. And I said I was sorry about that, said Luffy with a pout. Don't forget that we told you to keep your devil fruit powers a secret, Demo, said Ace, who trailed off in a memory. Luffy still whined at Ace about that when he said he was only 7 years old. Both Ace and Sabo gave Luffy a deadpan look at his answer. Serenity had to stifle a laugh as Luffy whined at Sabo and Ace. She could hear Luffy's crew commenting that he was just like his grandfather Garp, reckless and not able to keep secrets. Yet, before anything could be derailed further, Dragon was the one to get everyone back on track. The Buster Call, said Dragon. Right, said Nami with a sweat drop, we were talking about that. I know that you all would like to inform the populace, said Queen Serenity, however, if we did, we would tip off Jalmik and Akainu. That is true too, said Thatch with a sigh. So, how are we going to get the message to the citizens without letting the two know, questioned Deuce. Everyone stopped to think on the problem. Just as Ace and Serenity said, the citizens will want to know about the Red Alert, even when they will not be evacuating. Sabo sighed at how loyal the people were to his foster mother and his Imoto. He was just glad to regain his memories and help, unlike how he regained his memories and didn't help save Ace. Ace, on his part, could feel Sabo derailing into self-guilt and automatically smacked him lightly on the head while no one was watching. Sabo looked at Ace before wincing at the clear message Ace was giving Sabo, open corner bracket, stop thinking about the what-ifs. It's not your fault that Akainu was a Yi Lang and killed him. Don't blame yourself for my supposed death. I've got it, heard Sabo from Serenity. What have you got, Masumi, questioned Queen Serenity. How about using Toki ni, said Serenity, making her mother smile at the thought of a certain person. That could work, said a thoughtful Ace. Who's this, Toki ni, questioned Haruta, and when did you get another brother? He's the owner of Crown in the city, answered Sabo, and why wouldn't he be our brother? Yeah, said Luffy with a laugh, Toki Nisan is the best. He's great at handing out information to the gossipers. Great, thought the pirates, another brother. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is The Princess and the Pirate by Saranghae Tenshi. Chapter 33, A Meeting with Motoki, ASL's figure. A blonde-haired male was seen walking towards the throne room where Queen Serenity IV and her allies were holding court. He didn't know why the queen called for him since he was simply an owner to a bar restaurant. With his teal-blue eyes, he glanced around him just in case he was followed. He knew that Sailor Uranus would not be pleasant if he were to be followed when her instructions was to be discreet. The male straightened his back as he finally got to the throne room and breathed in a deep breath. With a knock on the door, he waited for a response from within. Come in, called out a female voice. You wish to see Serenity Jusama? Questioned the male as he opened the door. Hi, said Queen Serenity, come in and introduce yourself, Motoki-kun. Ah, said the now-known Motoki. Motoki blinked as he saw the full room assembled in front of him. He was surprised that His Majesty was in the middle of what looked like a war council. Wincing at the thought of being in war, Motoki looked around the room. He spotted some of the Ace's pirate crew, the Spade Pirates, along with Ace and Sabo. He then turned to see some of the Whitebeard commanders, the ones who couldn't see how they had hurt Ace as they kidnapped and restricted his freedom long ago. He turned a bit to see Luffy, who had an arm wrapped around Serenity Heim, with Hotaru standing vigilantly behind Serenity. He turned some more to see Luffy's pirate crew, the Strafuts, but saw that they were missing their sniper. Once more, he looked at the assembled navy officers, revolutionaries, and other kingdoms' royalty before his eyes settled onto one person, Mamoru. Mamoru-san, questioned Motoki in surprise. Hi, said a sheepish Mamoru. I am guessing that you know him, young man, questioned Dragon gruffly. Stuttered out Motoki after realizing his mistake. It's fine, Toki ni, said Serenity, they know that you know. Yeah, laughed Luffy, relax and let us explain. It's not a laughing matter, Lu, said Sabo. Motoki could still tell that Sabo wanted to laugh as well. He knew the kids well when he was a teenager on Silver Moon Kingdom Island. He could tell that Ace and Sabo were super overprotective of Luffy back in the day. To this day, he could still see that they were their overprotective selves, especially when you add Serenity and Hotaru into the mix. He could recall that Ace also burnt down a building just because Serenity was almost kidnapped. That was the day that Ace found out he still had fire powers, but with the planet Mars as a power instead of his devil fruit. Shaking mentally, Motoki could see everyone staring at him. Why are you amused? Questioned Nami. Well, said Motoki, I just know these people very well. In fact, I was just recalling to myself how Ace found out that his fire powers were still there, but backed up by a planetary power and not practiced at all. I said I was sorry to that bartender, grumbled Ace, who flushed a bit. We know, said those that knew of the incident. This I have got to hear, said Sabo in amusement. I would tell you, said Motoki. Demo, I think Serenity Jusama has called me into this room for something. Everyone froze at what Motoki said. They did indeed ask Motoki to come to the throne room to help with a situation they are facing. Apparently, being an older brother of sorts to the ASL siblings left everyone in wonder and had forgotten why they called him in the first place. Ace and Sabo even looked flustered at forgetting what was going on due to this being their older brother figure and wanting to talk with him like they usually do. They could also remember how they all met Motoki that one time. Flashback. Where are we going? Questioned Sabo. For the rest of their stay, Ace, Sabo, and Luffy were following Serenity and Hotaru around Serenity and Hotaru's home. They were surprised how peaceful it was. Sabo was also surprised by how the people would greet them all kind-like. It was far different from the nobles he grew up in if they ever ventured into town, that was for sure. Ace was even awed by how these people were treating him, like a kid. They didn't even see the shabby clothes his brothers and he were wearing. They just saw a kid walking around with other kids. Luffy, on his part, was bouncing around and taking stock on what they were looking at. He, however, didn't venture that far from his potential fiancé. Don't worry, said Serenity, it's a fun surprise. I'm sure you don't even have this kind of thing in Fuchsia, said Hotaru. I'm sure that we do, said a pouting Luffy. I bet that you don't, said Hotaru. Bet, questioned Ace. Nodded Hotaru, I bet that Luffy has never seen something like where we are going. If Luffy loses, questioned Sabo worriedly. He has to, started Hotaru before pausing. I'll think of something. Ace and Sabo were worried. Sure, they knew that Luffy grew up in Fuchsia before living in Mt. Kalubo with them. They also didn't know what Fuchsia has in the village as well. Ace and Sabo, however, could see Serenity and Hotaru having knowing looks as they walked down another street just to get to this so-called place. Once there, the ASL brothers looked at the establishment in front of them. They could tell it was like Makino's bar, but they had a feeling that there was more to it than just a bar and restaurant. As the five stepped into the establishment, Luffy, Ace, and Sabo were floored when they saw what was inside. Just like with Makino's place, there was a bar area for the adults, but there was a family-friendly air around the restaurant. The thing that shocked them, however, was another part of the restaurant. "Shug!" shouted Luffy. "What is all of this?" questioned Ace. "Are those machines?" questioned Sabo curiously. "They are indeed machines," said another male voice. "Demo, they are not just any machines. They are game machines for children to play." When they heard an unfamiliar voice behind them, the ASL brothers quickly turned around and got into defensive stances. There, before them, was a male teen that was slightly older than Ace and Sabo by 4 years. Luffy could see the kind teal blue eyes staring at the three, the male teen never stopping his grin. The three weren't quick enough to stop Serenity and Hotaru as the girls passed the boys in speed and barreled into the male teen. Luffy puffed his cheeks out at how happy Serenity was to be with another male that wasn't his brothers and him. He was going to march up there and give this teen a piece of his mind, but Sabo and Ace gripped his shoulders to stop him. His brothers knew him so well that it wasn't hard to restrain Luffy while watching the girls hug the male teen. "Toki-kun," exclaimed Hotaru. "Nice to see you too, Taru-chan," said this, Toki, "and you too, Sarah-chan. Do you have any new games or songs for us, Toki-kun?" questioned Serenity. "No new games, I'm afraid," said Toki. "Demo, we do have new songs for you and your new friends to try out. And speaking of new friends, this is Portgas D. Ace," said Hotaru, who pointed at Ace, "and this is Sabo." "Sabo doesn't like his last name, so he's decided to say Ace and he are twins," said a not-so-whisper from Serenity. "And this is," started Hotaru, who was interrupted. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy," proclaimed Luffy, "and I am going to be." Before Luffy could finish his proclamation, Ace and Sabo jumped on top of Luffy and covered his mouth. They didn't need this male teen to know what their dreams are, which is being pirates in the open seas. They also didn't need Luffy to shout out that he wants to be king of the pirates to a stranger as well. They, however, all saw how Serenity and Hotaru were being with this Toki person, wondering just who he actually was. "Mina," said Serenity, "this is Furuhata Motoki. He owns this establishment with his family," informed Hotaru. "He's also the greatest babysitter a girl could ask for," said a happy Serenity. "Babysitter," chorused the ASL brothers. Nodded the two girls enthusiastically. "Especially when we get to hang out at his arcade and karaoke place for free," cheered Serenity. "So, Luffy," said a coy Hotaru, "does Fuchsia have something like this?" Ace and Sabo could tell that Luffy indeed lost this so-called bet Hotaru had against him. They, as smart 10-year-olds, knew that Luffy didn't stand a chance since they were in a different home island other than their own. There were always going to be a bunch of differences between the two. Shaking their heads, Ace and Sabo studied this Motoki person and deemed him alright for a teenager. They didn't know how to actually act around a person whose personality is very kind and caring. It wasn't like the Dayton bandits were like this person's personality when they were being watched by them. "So, arcade games?" questioned Sabo. "Yup," said Motoki, "we have all sorts of arcade games, including claw machines and a Dragon Ball Z game." "What's Dragon Ball Z?" questioned a curious Ace. "Serenity hasn't shown you her manga yet," questioned Motoki in surprise. "I was sure that she would talk your ears off of her favorite manga titles." "We went here because someone decided that Sarah was going to marry him," said Hotaru. "She needed to distress." "Who would be bold enough to do that?" questioned a surprised Motoki. "Luffy," said two brothers with deadpan looks. "Me," cheered Luffy while he laughed cheerfully. Motoki blinked in surprise by the admission Luffy said. He knew that the queen wasn't even thinking about arranging a marriage to Serenity, but here was a little boy that said differently. No wonder Hotaru brought them all here before Serenity could tell them more about herself. At least, Serenity will have fun with the karaoke machine. Motoki smiled at that thought because he knew that Serenity loves to sing her heart out. He looked at the other children to see that they didn't even know what arcade games were. He hoped that at least they will be kids within his family's restaurant per bar. "How about a round of free arcade games and karaoke?" questioned Motoki with a smile. "Honto?" questioned Luffy with stars in his eyes. "Ah," said Motoki with a smile, "I'm sure you'll love what we have here." "Let's do karaoke first," said a happy Serenity. "Why should we?" said Ace with a scrunched up nose. "Why wouldn't we?" questioned Hotaru back. "Besides, karaoke is fun." Unless, questioned Sabo with trepidation. Unless you are too chicken to sing in front of us, said Hotaru with a smug look on her face. Who are you calling a coward, scoffed Ace. With that, Ace and Hotaru were arguing back and forth while unknowingly to Ace, Hotaru was leading him into a karaoke room. Luffy laughed his signature laugh again before rushing into the room to find songs that he would like to sing too. Sabo sighed at how typical Ace was when presented with a challenge. He looked at Motoki sheepishly and cautiously, but Serenity was the one who grabbed Sabo's hand. Come on, Sabo-kun, said a happy Serenity, we're going to be the last ones to sing. Ah, said Sabo who looked behind him to see Motoki going back to the counter and wiping it down. You don't have to be afraid of Motoki-kun, said Serenity to Sabo, he's very trustworthy. He'll always keep your secrets close to his heart and always look out for you, kind of like an Onichan older brother. Onichan, huh, questioned Sabo before. Come on, Sabo, said Luffy, I want to hear Ace sing. Luffy, shouted an embarrassed Ace from within the room. Let's go, Sarah, said Sabo who subconsciously gave Serenity a nickname, I can't wait to hear Ace sing. End flashback. Technically, thought Sabo with amusement, it was Sarah Imoto that gave me the idea of Motoki as an Onisan. Sabo, whispered Ace in Sabo's ear. Whispered Sabo back. Pay attention, whispered Ace back with a smug look on his face. Sabo flushed slightly as he knew that Ace wasn't paying much attention to the meeting as well. It wasn't his fault that he was in memory lane about Toki ni. It was just a good thing that no one was paying attention to Sabo's faraway expression. He was also glad that it was, to his embarrassment, Ace that only saw his look, or so he thought. Serenity and Hotaru sent knowing smiles at Sabo and Ace's back before turning back to the conversation at hand. Ah, Gomen, said Queen Serenity, we were just surprised that you know Mamoru here. Mamoru-kun sometimes visits with Lou and Sarah at the restaurant, said Motoki. And speaking of your restaurant, said Dragon, would we assume that you are Motoki? Furuhata Motoki. Ah, said Motoki with curious eyes, hi. Did I not introduce myself to you all? Said Robin, Demo, I am sure that Sencho and the others were leading the conversation in a different way. Said Motoki, anyways, Boku wa Furuhata Motoki, I am Motoki Furuhata. Then, Furuhata-san, said Sengoku, we have need of your expertise. Hi, said Motoki in a questioning tone. A week later, Silver Moon Kingdom Island, called out Queen Serenity through her microphone, are you ready for the final task? Yeah. Chapter 34, let the third trial commence. Queen Serenity IV looked at the huge crowd. If the plan was correct, Motoki already issued a warning to the masses. She was sure that it would have taken a while, but Motoki had connections. Those connections were what were going to save her people, unlike the Silver Millennium. At least, she hopes the outcome will not be like the Silver Millennium. Flashback. The Marines are doing what? Questioned a shocked Motoki. It didn't take long to explain to Motoki what was going on within the Silver Moon Kingdom Island. Since Motoki already knew about Mamoru's friendship with Luffy and Serenity, it was all about informing him about what was going on. It also helped that he already knew most of the information despite being a bartender, restaurant owner. The Whitebeard commanders were surprised by what Motoki knew, but as they looked at Ace and his brothers, it seemed as though Motoki was a very trusted person to tell your secrets to. Now, however, Motoki was wondering what was really going on within his home. Hi, said Garp with remorse, Mamoru's Tosen has it in his brain that Serenity is an object for the taking. He also knows about the… Actually, interrupted Mamoru, I never told him about the Ginzui show, just the fact that Serenity Jusama rules the Silver Alliance. Small mercies then, said Sengoku. As I have said before, said Motoki, your Tosen is crazy, Mamo-kun. Mamoru just nodded his head in agreement. If it was past him, he would have been up in arms to defend his father. He, however, knew that it was already wrong to call for a buster call of all things on a kingdom that didn't do anything to you. He does have morals, after all. Mamoru knew that Motoki felt a bit guilty for voicing his opinions, but Mamoru waved him off since this discussion was to save lives, not talk about how right or wrong Motoki was about his dad. Motoki, on his part, turned back to the meeting at hand. So, what do you want me to do? Questioned Motoki. Do you still have some contacts around the island? Questioned Queen Serenity. Hi, said Motoki before realization took place, you want me to spread word that the Marines may bomb our home. Hi, said a solemn Queen Serenity, I can't stop the people for going after the Marines and defending our home, Demo. Forewarned is forearmed, quoted Motoki. Hi, said Queen Serenity. Motoki looked at everyone present. He, just like with his Queen and Imoto figure, knew that the people will want to fight. Some could still recall the stories of the Silver Millennium that were passed down from adult to child within this island. They didn't want to end up like the Silver Millennium from their past. He looked at the worried looks Serenity had, along with the resigned looks from Sailor Pluto and Sailor Saturn. Then, he looked at his Odoto figures and saw how worn out the three were, especially Luffy. Luffy could hide it from his precious people, but he could always tell when things were getting too much for the little guy. Motoki turned his eyes back to his queen and smiled reassuringly. "I'll send word as soon as I can," said Motoki. "Just like that?" questioned Izo. "Just like that," said Motoki. "I'm sure that some of the Senshi can be discreet to inform the masses as well." "I'm sure they will be of help," said Pluto. "Especially Sailor Coronis and Sailor Mao," said Hotaru. Piped up Shanks, "exactly WHO or your contacts?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" said a smiling Motoki. Ace, Sabo, and Luffy laughed out loud at how much of a gremlin their Onisan figure was being towards one of Luffy's many precious people. Serenity and Hotaru sighed at how impish Motoki is being despite the grave situation at hand. The five, however, have faith that Motoki can and would spread the word. They also knew some of his contacts but knew not to ask who they were. Queen Serenity IV breathed a bit easier when she saw that Motoki was lending his contacts to spread the word. "Arigato," said Queen Serenity. "No need for thanks," said Motoki. "By the beginning of the third task, everyone will know what is going on." "That quick?" asked a surprised Thatch. "Never underestimate this island's inhabitants," said Motoki with a smirk. "True to that," agreed Mamoru, "though, for the third task." "You have a suggestion, brat?" asked Dragon. Mamoru bristled at Dragon's insult to him, but he knew that if he kept his mouth shut, then none of this would have happened. However, that was then and this is now. Mamoru knew just what else could save this island, which was about the third task. Luffy and Serenity looked at Mamoru like they knew what he was going to suggest. He smirked inwardly because their friendship was strong for the couple to just know what he was going to suggest. He turned his eyes to Motoki, for he too knew what Mamoru was planning. Those three were about to laugh when Ben, Shanks' second in command, asked, "So? What do you suggest? How about we make the third task?" End flashback. Queen Serenity IV was surprised by what Mamoru suggested, but if it could save her people, she was alright with some espionage. Looking at Mamoru who nodded slightly to her, Queen Serenity IV turned her sights to Luffy who was his childish self. Just seeing how at ease Luffy was, Queen Serenity IV could actually feel confident in this sort of plan. For now, the third task should be on the way. Queen Serenity IV turned towards the crowd once more and held the microphone up to her lips. "Now, the third task is all about battle strategy," said Queen Serenity. "Outside the safety dome, there are ships that were planted for this task. Each opponent will have their own crew that they handpick to see who will defeat these so-called ships." "Nani?" whispered Akainu. "Oh no," whispered a panicked Jalmik. "The most to defeat these ships will be the winner of this tournament," said Queen Serenity as she turned to the two opponents. "So, Mamoru, who will be a part of your crew?" "They can't say no, nay," questioned Mamoru hesitantly. "Yeah," said Queen Serenity, "once chosen, they have to follow your leadership." "Okay," said Mamoru, "may I have time to think about this? After all, we are showing off our battle strategies." "Of course," said Queen Serenity before turning to Luffy. "Luffy, who do you choose?" "My crew of course," said Luffy with a big sunny smile on his face. "No one will be the best besides my crew." Queen Serenity IV smiled as Luffy said that as she told the Strafuts to assemble onto the deck. The crowd was surprised to see a walking skeleton of all things coming up onto the stage. What was even weirder to the people was also a large robotic man and a small reindeer coming up to the stage. Luffy laughed cheerfully as he proclaimed that with his crew with him, no one was going to defeat him. His crew, on the other hand, felt really touched that Luffy has so much faith in them. "We won't let you down, Luffy," said Usopp. "Of course not," said Luffy, "you guys are in my crew, meaning you all are the best of the best." "Sencho," said a smiling Robin. "Let's just finish this so we can see you hitched, Captain," said Sanji. "I bet I can destroy more ships than you," Arrow Cook, taunted Zoro. "I bet that Usopp and I can," said Frankie, with the Uber, cannon. As the Strafuts conversed with each other with ease, the crowd could see how each member oozed with confidence. Queen Serenity IV then turned back to Mamoru who was looking at the assembled Strafuts. He knew that Luffy may punch him once he made his choice, but at least, those that he was choosing would want to also get into the action of destroying marine ships. He could also call upon some of the destructive Senshi who could also want to destroy those that would potentially harm their home. "Serenity Jusama?" questioned Mamoru. "Hi," questioned Queen Serenity. "How many people can we choose for our task?" questioned Mamoru. An excellent question, said Queen Serenity. To make it fair, let's say 8 people. That doesn't include you. Ah, said Luffy suddenly. Hi, questioned Queen Serenity. May I also get Trafi for this task too, questioned Luffy. Trafi, questioned Queen Serenity and Mamoru. He means, said Nami, Trafalgar Law. Queen Serenity IV blinked before allowing Luffy to add one more person, making the group a total of 10. As Queen Serenity IV called out for a Trafalgar Law to come to the stage, said man was grumbling about Luffy. He did not want to be a part of whatever Luffy got himself into. However, he knew that he didn't have a choice since Queen Serenity IV already said that those picked cannot respond with a negative answer. Law slowly dragged his feet towards the stage, all the while cursing in his head about how he shouldn't have made that alliance with Luffy to begin with. Once Law was on stage, Luffy was bouncing excitedly at his arrival. Hi, Trafi, exclaimed Luffy with happiness. Mugiwara, Strafut, said Law, why am I being dragged into this? We'll explain more on our ship, said a sweat-dropping Nami. You better, said Law with a huff. Good luck, Captain, called out his crew members, the Heart Pirates. TCH, sounded out Law, I shouldn't even be dragged into this mess. As Luffy laughed while Law grumbled, Mamoru looked at each individual with an inward smile. It was times like these that Mamoru had to hand it to Luffy's good intuition on who he deemed worthy to be a part of his pirate crew. Mamoru thought hard on who he should actually name to be a part of his own third task. He knew that with this task, he needed to think who would be best in destroying the marine ships. He couldn't choose most devil fruit powers due to their weakness, but at least, they would get a workout. Mamoru smiled as he finally finalized who he would be getting for his team. Mamoru, questioned Queen Serenity, have you chosen your team members? Hi, said Mamoru before, I call forth Portgas D. Ace. Nani, growled out Akainu. Sakino D. Sabo, continued Mamoru. At least, it's not my original last name, grumbled Sabo. Monkey D. Garp, continued Mamoru. Guess I'm doing treason, Seni, mumbled Garp to Sengoku. Hitoki no Sengoku, Sengoku the Buddha, continued Mamoru. You're not the only one, mumbled back Sengoku. Kobe the hero, continued Mamoru. Sailor Saturn, Akagami no Shanks, red-haired Shanks, Fushicho no Marco, Marco the Phoenix, and Whitebeard's fourth commander, Thatch. Mamoru did not once look at his Tosen as he called forth his own 9 people. He knew that these people were the best bet in defeating most, if not all, the marine ships that came with the Buster Call. He also knew that this was a great way for certain people to take their aggressions out on certain individuals. Jalmik, on his part, was appalled that Mamoru did not even once named any other marines besides Kobe, Garp, and Sengoku. He was so sure that Mamoru would have chosen Akainu as a sure victory. He, however, never once realized that Mamoru didn't choose Akainu because he would go off the handle and not listen to Mamoru. Akainu, on the other hand, was growling to himself. He was sure that Portgas D. Ace, one of the devil's children, was dead. Portgas D. Ace is dead, called out Akainu, I am sure that I can take his place. Yeah, said a familiar voice, get your facts straight. I'm not dead, Baka. Nani, questioned Akainu in disbelief. Yup, said a smirking Ace as he stepped onto the stage with Sabo by his side, looks like you didn't kill a devil's child, Akainu. You dare harbor a criminal, growled out Akainu. Jalmik, said Queen Serenity with a fierce glare of her own, if you don't let this dog stay on his leash, I will announce that Luffy is the winner without further prompting. You can't do that, yelled out Jalmik. Of course, I can, said Queen Serenity, I am the ruler of this island. Whatever I say goes. Jalmik gaped at the queen as she turned to glare at Akainu. Akainu, who was growling, promptly sat back down. He didn't know how Ace was alive, but he was going to permanently end him once more. Jalmik, on his part, was sweating a bit as he unconsciously panicked. He didn't know that the so-called ships in question was the Buster Call ships that were already coming to the island. He didn't know that his plans were already going up in flames as Mamoru was the inside spy for the Silver Moon Kingdom Island. As the two gave grimaced looks, Queen Serenity looked at the assembled people. She knew that Sailor Saturn was the only Senshi coming to destroy some ships with her vast powers, but she also knew that she had to give a rule to said Senshi. Saturn, please come here before the third task starts, said Queen Serenity. Hi, questioned Hotaru as she faced Queen Serenity IV. I want you to promise me that you will not use your last resort, whispered Queen Serenity, unless we are at war with the Marine Sand or losing. Hi, muttered Hotaru with wide violet eyes. Good girl, whispered Queen Serenity before looking back at the crowd. Now, let the third task commence. Chapter 35, Trafi gets a clue and Senshi preparing. Mugiwara, Strafut, growled out Law. Hi, questioned Luffy. What is going on? Growled out Law with a glare. Once the last and final trial was announced, along with their teams, the Strafuts and Trafalgar Law were setting out towards the Strafuts pirate ship. Law was disgruntled because he didn't know what was happening, but he blamed his situation on Mugiwara. He really regrets being in an alliance with a wildcard that is Monkey D. Luffy. Law looked around to see that they were near the Strafuts ship inside internally. With that mental sigh, Law stopped walking, leading to the Strafuts looking at him curiously. It wasn't until he couldn't take the stairs that he stared right back at Luffy and asked once more what was going on. I guess we should tell Trafalgar what's going on, said Nami. Indeed, said Robin, it is only fair since everyone chosen for this mission already knows what's going on. Mission? Asked Law with a twitch of his eyebrow. Yo, said Frankie, we should really talk on the Sunny. Everyone agreed, even if Law was about to strangle someone or use his powers to remove certain appendages. He was very irritated that his questions weren't being answered once more, but he eventually followed Zoro onto the Sunny, the name of the Strafuts pirate ship. Luffy, of course, swung onto the ship while everyone calmly boarded. Law could even see from here the other team boarding another ship that had an interesting upturned crescent moon on its mast. Turning to those that he was supposed to team up with, Law crossed his arms while everyone was getting ready to sail. Since we are finally aboard Mugiwara's ship, said Law, kindly tell me just why I am dragged into this. What exactly is this so-called mission? It's kind of a long story, said Usopp. Yeah, said Chopper as he checked if he had a good amount of his rumble balls. Well, we still have a bit of time to talk, said a thoughtful Nami, don't we? The mission starts when we hear the twinkling bell from the Crystal Carillon, said Sabo. Everyone jumped as they heard Sabo's voice. They knew that the others who would be helping in said mission would be on the other ship, but hearing Sabo's voice. It wasn't until Luffy exclaimed Sabo's name where he was sitting on a barrel with a Denden Mushi. Nami was quick to turn one hand into a fist and hit Luffy over the head for scaring her. She knew that she shouldn't do that, but Nami was fed up with how Luffy could surprisingly hide things from his crew, especially with the marriage to a Haim of all things. Don't scare us like that, shouted Nami. I guess Luffy surprised his crew again, said an amused Ace. That brat is always the one to surprise everyone, laughed out Garp. Anyways, said Shanks, how are we going to do this? Do what? Questioned Law exasperated, for all I know, this is a trial. Demo, Mugiwara and his crew says otherwise. Luffy, groaned out Mamoru, are you telling me that you chose someone who does not know the situation? I thought he would get a kick out of destroying Marines, pouted Luffy. That's all good and fun, said Thatch. Demo, Trafalgar Law needs to know what is at stake. Law sighed in his head that finally someone was talking sense. He just had to wait until someone finally tells him the reason why he was dragged into this. Despite Luffy saying that it was fun to destroy the Marines, because it is, Law really needed to know what was going on. Law, however, did think that it was weird Luffy and the others say that they were destroying Marine ships when the Queen herself never said such a thing. Something was being fishy about all of this, and he was having a headache just trying to think about it. Trafi-san, said Robin in mirth. Don't call me that, said Law. It has appeared that the celestial dragon known as Jalmik, continued Robin, and Akainu have planned to do a buster call if Mamoru does not win Serenity Haim's hand in marriage. That is why the third task is built around defeating these so-called ships. These ships are essentially the ships that may do the buster call on the Silver Moon Kingdom Island. Essentially, said Shanks over the Denden Mushi, this trial is a cover-up for us to destroy the marine ships before Jalmik can issue an actual buster call. And I am here because, questioned Law. I already said the reason, said Luffy who puffed his cheeks out, you'll have fun destroying the Marines. Law couldn't really argue Luffy's logic. He did get excited in just defeating the Marines. He actually helped fight off some of those Marines during the whole Luffy punching a celestial dragon incident. Law, however, felt irritated by being dragged into another one of Luffy's messes though. He never signed up to be dragged into Luffy's messes, but here he is. Law really wanted to strangle Luffy for always having a magnet for trouble. It always seems as though trouble does find him no matter what he was doing. Mugiwara, said Law with a twitch of his eyebrow, do you just have trouble attracted to you or do you find trouble? Dahahaha, laughed out Shanks, he totally pegged you in your chaotic trouble magnet ways, anchor. I'm not a trouble magnet, yelled out Luffy. Of course, you are, piped up those that knows Luffy. If he's a trouble magnet, said Marco, is this one of the things that attracts to Luffy, yoi? You'll find that our Ododo always finds these kinds of troubles, said an amused Ace. I do not, pouted Luffy. Luffy, said Hotaru with a deadpan voice, since meeting you, you have gotten eaten by big animals on your home island every single day. Let's not forget all the times you ran off and trouble followed immediately after, said Nami as well. Luffy pouted once more as everyone who he adventured with piped up about what he has done on said adventures. At least, he got to test his strength with very strong opponents. That latest one before coming here was the toughest in his opinion. Luffy looked around to see everyone relaxing as they waited for the twinkling bells to signal to start the trial. He could also see Law still twitching with each story and knew that Law was thinking about his friendship with him. Of course, Luffy wouldn't be himself without letting his friend be a part of this trial. Defeating Marines together always have the best outcomes in said friendship. Luffy nodded to himself just as his ears perked up by Queen Serenity IV's voice. "Teams, are you ready?" sounded Queen Serenity through the mic. "How are we supposed to answer?" started Usopp until. "We are," shouted Luffy loudly. "We are as well," called out Mamoru through a loudspeaker. "I guess that answers your question," said Sanji with a smirk. Yeah, muttered Usopp. Then, called out Queen Serenity, "Let the trial start." Everyone, besides the ASL brothers and Hotaru, was startled when they heard twinkling of bells resounding throughout the island. Luffy laughed as he remembered those bells, especially when he got to see a real-life Pegasus afterwards. He wasn't disappointed as he, along with his crew and the other team, heard a distinguished neighing before a beautiful white Pegasus flew across their ships. Everyone was in awe as the Pegasus descended and stood next to Mamoru. "It is good to see you again, old friend," said Mamoru with a bitter smile. "You know that Pegasus?" questioned Kobe. "Of course," said Mamoru, as he is actually Helios, the guardian of the Golden Crystal, priest of Elysian, and my dear friend from long ago. "It is good to see you once more, old friend," said Helios without moving his Pegasus mouth. He talked," exclaimed everyone, Usopp and Chopper holding each other in surprise. "Of course, he could," said Hotaru. "Now, are we going to get this trial started or not?" "Just one more question," said Law. "And that is," questioned Sengoku. "Why are we being buddy-buddy with a celestial dragon?" questioned Law, who was looking straight into Mamoru's eyes. "Oh," said Luffy, "he's my friend." "He's your what?" yelled out Law in surprise. "At the main stage. Come along, Heim," said Pluto. Serenity looked at Sailor Pluto in surprise before following. She didn't know what was going on since she was looking forward to watching Luffy and his pirate crew decimate some ships, but if Sailor Pluto wants her to go with her to somewhere, then she should go. Serenity looked around to see Sailor Pluto leading her to another room. There, Serenity looked around to see all of the Sailor Senshi, besides Hotaru, in said room. She could see Sailor Uranus and Sailor Starfighter arguing as they looked over a map of their home island. She could also see Sailor Mercury, Sailor Kaku, and Sailor Star Maker shaking their heads at the two hot-headed leaders of their respective groups. Wondering what was going on, Serenity didn't have to wait long as Sailor Pluto slammed her time staff onto the floor. "Now that we are all quiet," said Pluto. "Before we begin, Pluto," said Mars with her arms crossed, "why is the Heim here as well?" "Since she is too a Sailor Senshi," said Pluto, "she has the right to be here to help us with the upcoming battle." "What?" yelled out the Inners, along with a few other Senshi. "Demo," said Venus, "aren't we supposed to protect her?" "I am sure that she can handle herself," said Pluto, "and even if she can't, the team that she is going to be with will protect her." Serenity flushed in embarrassment as the other Senshi started to talk among themselves. She knew that this life, she is new to the whole Sailor Senshi business, but she did have training. If she didn't have training, she too would be questioning Sailor Pluto on putting her in the battle. She could also recall that her mother told her about her past life when it was finally revealed to her and how she never had battle training. But, in this life, Serenity knew that she was probably not the best out of everyone here, but she will try. She wants to try because she wants to protect those precious to her. Tuning back to the argument at hand, she was touched when, "I can vouch that Serenity will be a good Senshi," said Galaxia. Here, agreed Lethe, "you never saw her train with Saturn and those brothers." "I guess," said a worried Jupiter, "yet, who will watch her back?" "Why," said Pluto, "the Amazon Quartet, of course." "Yeah," said a happy Pallas, "we're going to protect our Heim." "Just wait until those enemies of ours get a taste of our powers," said a smirking Juno. The other Senshi smirked or smiled at each other. It has been a very long time since they came together just to protect their home. Usually, the Queen would send some out to scout in different solar systems and making sure the peace was secure. But now, the Senshi were all together in one room and discussing what to do with their enemy known as the Celestial Dragons. They weren't going to be like them and kill, but they were also hoping the Ginzuisho may have an effect on their impure hearts. Well, one can hope at least. "So, the plan?" questioned Star Healer. It has commenced with the soon-to-be king and his crew, along with the reincarnated Earth Oji and his entourage, said Mercury. Helios, questioned Iron Mouse. He is just there to watch over his Oji, informed Neptune. Queen Serenity already approved of this move. And since Helios is impartial, piped up Venus, both sides get healed from him. So, no explosions, questioned Tinyanka. No explosions, said an amused Kaku. Ah, bemoaned those that are fire-happy. Anyways, said Pluto, we should really hurry about the second part. Hi, said Jupiter who cracked her knuckles, let's show our repayment to this Akainu's sins, along with Jalmik. For the sake of our pseudo-Ojis. For the sake of peace, reminded Mnemosyne. That too, said a smirking titanium Karoko. Then, fellow Senshi, said Pluto, let the mission begin. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is The Princess and the Pirate by Saranghae Tenshi. The end.